Good morning. It is 3 minutes after 10. It's a bit early, isn't it, for the pub? Just under an hour early, but I think we'll go there anyway. I'm struck by a couple of things this morning. Job shortages, vacancies in workplaces seem to me to be key. You heard Nick talking about nurses earlier. A very strange state of affairs when migration, that dread word that has been used to pollute politics so much in recent years and to divide the population, to divide even families, it's rocketing, and yet vacancies are not, or rather vacancies are not being filled. David Smith in the Times, Sunday Times, wrote a rather good article about that I heartily recommend. But today is not the day for us to examine that particular phenomenon. Today is the day for us to go to the pub. Would you believe me if I said to you that when a politician, particularly a Conservative politician supportive of Brexit, is asked for benefits of it, would you believe me if I said I would quite like them to come up with some good ones? I don't derive much pleasure from the probability that they won't be able to. Would you believe me? I wish you would, because it's pointless to sit here. I've said this a million times, and I know I'm not wasting my breath for all but the most gammony rump of the population. It's pointless sitting here hoping for bad things to happen just to prove you even more right than you've been proved already. If Rishi Sunak, and it's not a very big deal, it's slightly tragic anyway for a Prime Minister who is both a man and, of course, teetotal, to claim that the most obvious benefits of Brexit from where he's sitting are a reduction in the price of sanitary products and beer. But it would be okay if it was true, wouldn't it? We wouldn't mind if it would be pleased. Would you be pleased if it was true? If it was true, it would be a good thing. It would be better than a bad thing. It would possibly be more positive than ambivalent, and that is what he said, word for word, on that plane, which is why I haven't got a clip of it. He said it several thousand feet in the sky, en route to this G7 summit in Japan. He said, "We reformed the alcohol duties. That means this summer you will be able to get cheaper beer in pubs. These are all very tangible benefits of Brexit that I've already delivered." Now, when you consider that we were promised £350 million a week for the NHS from savings, from extra money, from profit that the country would somehow accrue by dint of no longer being in the European Union, when you remember that you were promised cheaper food by Jacob Rees-Mogg, among many other people, you were promised shorter waiting lists within the NHS, you were promised cheaper shoes, you were promised less red tape, it would be easier to do business with foreign territories and foreign companies. In fact, the list of promises that were made is as long as your arm. And yet now we're actually here. Now the box is actually open. Now we're actually examining what was in this gift-wrapped receptacle that you bought in 2016. Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, a lifelong Brexit supporter, is offering you cheaper beer and cheaper sanitary products. I'm going to focus on the beer, and I'm just going to ask you whether this is true, because I said to you some time ago that if you really want to get the business, if you really want to get the proper insights into industrial stories, particularly with reference to Brexit, but even if Brexit had never happened, you get the truly unbiased journalism in the trade press, in the organs that are dedicated to a specific sector. So Inside Housing, for example, does an absolutely brilliant job. The Grocer, if you want to know about food prices, imports, exports, the Grocer is a much, much better place to go than pretty much any national newspaper. And to be honest with you, the national newspapers that will give you a clear picture are the ones that are probably relying upon the trade press for their insights rather than relying upon the prejudices of their editor or their owner. And this story is no exception. It comes from a trade publication called The Drinks Business, and it essentially invites breweries to respond to Rishi Sunak's claims that cheaper beer is both on the way and due to Brexit. They've spoken to two breweries, Derbyshire-based Thornbridge and Suffolk-based Adnams, home of Ghost Ship, of course. And the COOs and the CEOs and the head people have been left somewhat baffled by what Rishi Sunak is claiming. The CEO of Thornbridge says the price of beer, food and other drinks in pubs has been increasing for some time. The inflationary pressures that brewers, other suppliers and the pubs themselves face continue and will continue for the foreseeable future. They're already sucking up huge percentages of these cost increases, and the idea that it's somehow going to segue into cheaper beer has left him completely baffled. Similarly, the production director at Adnams, who says it's Brexit has not saved the day. The only significant reduction in alcohol duty is on 3.4% ABV beer, which could have been done while we were still in the EU. Even here, it will have no impact at the bar, as it's dwarfed by all the other costs pubs and breweries have taken. So I'm going to open up the phone. Here's a text. Here's an unsigned text from me. Please, no 22-minute monologue today to open your programme. Listen, far be it from me to mention my latest audience figures every 20 minutes, but I must be doing something right, pal. Even if you don't like the 22-minute monologues, there is clearly a market for them. So I am going to, well, all right, I'll try today. What time is it now? 9 minutes after 10. I'll try today to bring it in a little earlier than is perhaps becoming customary, not least because it is one of those subjects about which I will be entirely reliant on you. I don't have any knowledge of running a pub. I do like going to pubs, not as much as I used to do, but I tell you now, I haven't noticed beer getting any cheaper, and I can't see much prospect of it getting cheaper anytime soon. So how do we extend the conversation beyond the bar? Well, I think the politics of it is similar to the conversation that we touched on yesterday with regard to what does out of touch mean when we talk about Rishi Sunak. Where is he getting the idea as a teetotalist who presumably never visits pubs, and even when he does, he's not entirely sure how to operate a debit card in the wild? Do you remember that when it turned out he didn't know how debit cards worked? What's he actually talking about? 0345 6060 973. So we'll begin with the booze. We'll begin with the boozers. What sort of pressures are you under if you are a publican, if you're running a pub, or if you're a brewery? Just talk to us. I'm going to do a little bit more of this as the cost of living crisis continues. It doesn't always work when we go sectoral. Obviously, in terms of casting my net in the hope of getting interesting contributors, the bigger the net, the more you're going to catch. But will it be interesting? If you invite everyone on from a florist to a fish and chip shop owner, I don't know that you get to the nub of the matter, because although the general issues affecting businesses are going to be the same, the specifics are going to be slightly different. And that's why I want to concentrate on pubs first. 0345 6060 973. What is it like at the moment running a pub or running a brewery? 0345 6060 973. Hit those numbers. You will get through. I don't know. I've got to stop this terrible new habit of telling you not to ring in, but I don't know how interesting it is for you and me to compare the costs of beer. I think we should probably do a little bit of that. The more you drink, oddly, the more qualified you are to contribute to this programme. Do you know what? That might be true every day, but it's particularly true today. The more you drink, the more qualified you are to contribute to this programme. But you notice it, don't you? You notice the cost of beer. And of course, as with everything else cost of living related, the less you've got in your pocket, the more you notice the increasing costs. I think of that woman that I mentioned to you yesterday, completing her weekly shopping for the same stuff week in, week out, shopping from the same shopping list, not paying particular attention to the prices, which is obviously not something she's going to do again, given what transpired at the tills. She gets to the tills and it's £8 or £9 more than she's used to, and she has to put stuff back. That is probably the starkest illustration I can provide of what the cost of living crisis actually feels like for people who don't have margins. Alison in Falcourt yesterday introduced us to that lovely's not right, but that very helpful notion of margins. It's about the possibility. I'm always very conscious of being sensitive when I tackle a subject like this, because I don't want to sound as out of touch as Rishi Sunak, and I'm confident that I'm not. But the idea of running out of money before you've run out of month is something that I suspect families, individuals up and down the country who never really thought they'd be in that category are now experiencing, or are very close to experiencing. Crikey, running out of money before you've run out of month. And listen, I could screw on my Anne Widdecombe head at this point and say, well, then don't drink beer then, or don't go to the pub. But at some point, there's not going to be anything left to tell people not to do. It was cheese sandwiches this week, wasn't it, for Widdecombe? Ugh. Don't eat cheese sandwiches if you can't afford cheese sandwiches. Where do you end up next? Don't eat dust if you can't afford dust. It's incredible, this pair. It's a paring knife, isn't it, when you slice off a bit? Is that the right word? It is, isn't it? You pare it. You slice off a bit more and a bit more and a bit more, and suddenly there's nothing left. That's what people like Widdicombe and that Brendan Clark-Smith bloke are like. And 30p Lee. Just crassly insensitive, grossly insensitive. So, well, if you can't afford this, you can't afford that. It's nothing to do with the fact that my party's been in power 13 years. It's everything to do with how feckless and work-shy you are, or how poor your financial management is. And so if you can't afford this, then cut that off. So, yeah, beer could be construed as a luxury. I understand that beer could be construed as a luxury, and I understand that in many ways it is a luxury, which is why I'm referring you back to Rishi Sunak's claim that it's actually getting cheaper. I think he's talking unmitigated twaddle. I'd suggest that he might have drunk too much, but he's teetotal, which makes him even less qualified to comment on this matter than he would have been if he'd been in a pub any time recently. And that leaves us with two questions. Question number one, what's going on? 0345 6060 973. Question number two, I'm not going to get this right, but I'm going to rely upon you to fill in the gaps in the question by providing high-quality answers. He's Prime Minister, right? I've been fascinated since he got the job by the relationship between his wealth and the quotidian, the daily experience of his voters. And I'm thinking as much of people who support him as people who perhaps don't. And I do heavily believe that you don't have to... that being wealthy is not an obstacle to empathy. I talked about this a lot yesterday. Maybe there's a limit on it. Maybe there's a level of wealth at which really you should just be giving it away. But I don't know, and I don't think that's helpful. But increasingly, it seems to me that whenever Rishi Sunak turns his attention to the very simple question of running out of money before you run out of week or before you run out of month, I don't think he's got the ability to imagine it. I really don't. You suggested this to me yesterday, and I was a bit resistant at first because it's a fairly crushing conclusion to arrive at, isn't it? Especially about the person who's in charge of the country. But that ability to imagine what it would be like, to not have some sort of subconscious safety net in place. You can't actually run out of money. If you've got several £100 million in the bank, it must be harder than it is for everybody else to actually imagine running out, ending up with zero. I can't believe for a minute that I've come up with this phrase, but it's a jolly powerful one, isn't it? Running out of money before you've run out of month. Running out of money before you've run out of week. And that's why I don't understand I genuinely don't understand how Rishi Sunak can end up saying this out loud. If, as seems likely, it turns out to be completely at odds with our shared experience, why has he said it? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need, okay? And I'm not doing a 20-minute monologue, despite the cavalcade of contributors dismissing, even poo-pooing that misery guts, asking me to keep it brief today and explaining why you love them. I was particularly taken with Andre's explanation. Please don't stop the opening monologue, James. Please don't shorten it. As a married family chap, the loo of an evening, listening on catch-up, is a 20-minute oasis of peace while I catch up with you on YouTube. I can't base my entire broadcasting career on your lavatorial needs, Andre, but I shall do my best to bear you in mind next week. For now, though, it's 10:17. The phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. It is 19 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we've got the sort of entry-level question. We've got the saloon bar, where I'm asking what's happening in pubs, what's it like to run one, how is it going? And then we've got the lounge bar, where we're having a slightly more civilized conversation, shall we say, a slightly more nuanced conversation about what Rishi Sunak is up to. What's going on in his head when he comes out and says one of the Brexit benefits. I mean, as a Brexiter, how do you feel about that? I don't know if you were listening to Nick's show today, but he had a Labour person and a Tory person on, comparing 13 years of Labour to 13 years of Tory. Even the Tory couldn't come up with anything. Quite incredible. Although, of course, when asked the question why, no one mentioned the right-wing media being a huge part of the reason why people end up voting to smash themselves in the face with a frying pan. But on we go. Dom's in Liverpool to kick things off. Dom, what have you got?
Hi, James.
Hello, mate.
Rishi Sunak's talking out his proverbial.
He is, isn't he? But he doesn't know he is. I'm not sticking up for Rishi Sunak when I say things like that, but I think I've still got Boris Johnson syndrome. I'm so used to the worst kind of barefaced liar that I think... Anyway, you carry on. I've said enough.
Well, the cost of beer isn't going down; it's going up. We've got a brewery in Liverpool, and we've held off raising prices as long as we can, and we've had to do it. Unfortunately, it's fortuitous you're having this discussion. We're having to tell our customers today we're having to put prices up, but it's not. Really? We're not putting them up in kind of proportion to how much we should really be putting them up by.
Talk me through. So I think we spoke during the pandemic quite a bit, didn't we? So we
talked about Scotch eggs.
We did talk about Scotch eggs. God, the good old days. Scotch eggs but you brew and sell. So you have a microbrewery and a retail premises. So you're coming at it from both ends. Just talk to me briefly, if you would, Dom, about that process, that conversation that you have with your colleagues and your partners about knowing that every time your costs go up and your prices don't, your margins come down. So what's the breaking point, if you like, or what's the squeaking point?
Well, it's when you're it's when you're getting an electricity bill, which is 40% higher than it should be, and it stops you from being able to make other important purchases like ingredients or like other things that you have to hold off on in order to pay a great big bill or a VAT bill or something like that. VAT is still at 20%. Yeah. Which really it shouldn't be. You look across Europe and elsewhere, and we're still paying over the odds for pretty much everything. And when you're faced with these decisions, you have to look at it rationally and look at the market and see how much your customers are prepared to pay to have your product in. And then make that decision. Because
and you've got it's quite delicate. Then it's quite a delicate calibration, because if you put it up too much, people will stop coming in altogether.
Yeah, exactly. And the wholesale customers, there is even though there are kind of, off the top of my head this year, around about 30 craft breweries have closed.
Is that right? And 150 plus pubs in the first 3 months. That's only January, February, March. We're in the middle of May now.
Yeah, exactly. And we've got spikes. We have spikes in trade. So Eurovision's just happened in Liverpool.
That was good for you. That was good.
It's incredible. It was good, yeah. And for the city centre, other areas that weren't showing it or in the suburb, not so good. But generally across the board, everyone's just paying more, for everything.
So what was how much are you putting prices up by?
It's around about 6%.
Okay. So the Prime Minister is on his way to Japan stating categorically that prices of beer in pubs are coming down in price. You run a pub, or you run a retail outlet. You run a tap room, and you're putting your prices up literally on the same day he said it.
Yeah, well, we're going to stage it so our wholesale prices go first, and then we look at sort of our on the pump tap prices as well.
What do you think he's playing at? Go on.
Sorry?
You're answering the question I was about to ask. Go on.
I just don't know who he's talking to, because you look at you were mentioning about trade publications earlier that how report incredibly on these things. The Morning Advertiser for the hospitality sectors on top of all this, and some of the drinks publications, and everyone's saying the same thing. So I don't know who he's talking to and getting this information from.
That's seriously, if we do a job swap, I think the show would be in much safer hands than your brewery would. That's the question. Who is he talking to? So when Rishi Sunak is asked what are the Brexit benefits, and he says sanitary products and beer, who is he actually talking to? Because people who use sanitary products and beer are not recognising the reality that he's describing.
No, well, that's it. Yeah, sanitary products are still, aren't they still? Don't they still attract VAT?
I think so. No, they don't. No, we could do that. I mean, the EU is actually following suit, and there's never been any VAT on sanitary products in Ireland either. So it was always a slightly more complicated issue than the facts that are. Dom, thank you, mate. I wish you well. What's the name of the place?
Carnival Brewing Company, down by the waterfront in Liverpool. Down
by the waterfront. Thank you for that. 25 minutes after 10. If I do this hour right, I should be able to do a little tour of the UK, not paying for a drink anywhere. Not that that's a priority on a morning like this. Nick's in Bishop Stortford. Nick, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. Yeah, first time caller here. The whole thing about beer going down in cost is just absolutely terrible. It's just not. It's just a very simple thing, and people just don't realize it. So even if the price of a keg in duty goes down, the cost for us to clean them in energy and chemicals has doubled. Chemicals 35% up. So there is absolutely no way these things are going down. It is dreamland that man is in.
Where are you from, Nick?
I'm Belgian myself, so
I'm fascinated by your accent. and obviously, being Belgian, you're supremely qualified to brew beer. That is one of the great national achievements of Belgium. So I think you've just touched on something there and I'm not being charitable towards Sunak. For the record, I think he's absolutely awful. Not least because he's put Suella Braverman back in the Home Office, and she's objectively disgusting. But when that beautiful question that Dom threw up, that frankly, as the presenter of this programme, I should have settled on ages ago, who is he talking to? He's sort of talking to accountants in a way who are only looking at one tiny part of a big picture, i.e. duty on 3.4% ABV beer.
Yeah, we do Belgian style beer. So basically, we have nothing in that range. So the lowest one we have is 4.8 Pilsner. The highest we have is a 9.5% triple.
9.5%.
Yeah.
What measures do you sell that in?
1/3 and half.
Yeah, good. that could get messy.
Rolling out of my tap room. So
what is the? I love how there's 2 calls in and 2 tap rooms already at other ends of England. What is your understanding of what this duty change will do in the summer? Is that 3.4% accurate, or have I got duff information there in front of me?
No, that should be accurate. But for us, we don't even bother to follow all these changes because it doesn't impact us.
So it's not making any difference at all to you?
It's not making any difference at all to us. So then if we wholesale, if people are going to expect that we're going to reduce the price of a keg of beer, that's just absolutely not going to happen like the previous caller said. It's likely to go up with anywhere between 5 and 10%. Now we are a very small outlet, so we can't really put our prices up aggressively because we just don't have a big market yet.
Sure.
We started up 6 months before the lockdown.
Boy.
But we are lucky in a sense that we have our own tap room. We have kind of direct sales, so we don't have middlemen, so we don't have to aggressively put up our prices, but it's not. People forget the whole thing. So our grain's gone up by 30%. Electricity is double. Cardboard, just to package and ship things, cardboard up 40%. Our staffing costs, obviously, we try to give people a 10% pay rise just so they can deal with the cost of living. That goes out of my overall margin as well.
Yeah. It's insane. This is a mad conversation. And in fact, I was trying to make a list of all the things that your costs entail, and you just finished it off for me. So I've got staff, chemicals, energy, grain or raw materials, we'd call it, and cardboard, packaging. That's 5 things, which, even if there were an appreciable improvement due to duty cuts, they'd have been completely dwarfed by just those 5 things. And you're talking about multiples of 10%, 30%, 40% increases, not little, piddling 5% or 2% increases.
Yeah, so most places I've been lucky following the market with the energy costs, and we tied ourselves in about 90% increase in our electricity costs.
What's he talking about? Who's he talking to then, Nick? Who's Rishi Sunak?
I do not know. I find it baffling. But yeah, for somebody both. Debit card, then God knows who he's talking to.
Hang on, I've got to stop for the news. I've got to stop for the news. What is the business? Is the business in Bishop Stortford?
Yeah, it is. It's called the Belgian Brewer.
Did you spend a long time thinking that one up, Belgian Brewer, Nick?
That all came up over a few strong pints.
They were very glad, not the 9 point, whatever one was. Thank you, Nick. The Belgian Brewer in Bishop Stortford, both literally and commercially. It's 10:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Thomas Watts is here now with your headlines. It is 34 minutes after 10. Staff, chemicals, energy, grain, even flipping cardboard, all of these things adding enormous increases to the simple business of running a pub, and all of which contributing to the fact that over 150 closed during the first 3 months of this year, and that's closed forever. So Dom up in Liverpool running his brewery, his tap room. Should we put that? Shall I ask that today, or shall I do it on mystery? I don't want to ask it out loud because you'll ring in. You don't ring in to answer this question. I'll wait until I get another owner of it. So what's the difference between a tap room and a pub? We will soon find out. Who's Rishi Sunak talking to? He was talking to Beth Rigby of Sky News overnight, or possibly yesterday, and it was a remarkable exchange. Listen, let me level with you. All right. When I say I think he's hideous, it is in large part because of what he's done to Suella Braverman, bringing her back into the cabinet, and she is so objectively vile, so performatively disgusting that any over-optimistic desire to think that Sunak might have marked a distinct shift from where we were before just disappears with the appointment of Suella Braverman. But I don't think he's either as morally corrupt as Boris Johnson or as obviously useless as Liz Truss. So you can have gradations of disgust at politicians, can't you? You're not going to have exactly the same level of disgust at Boris Johnson, Liz Truss, Rishi Sunak, Theresa May and David Cameron. You're going to have gradations of disapproval, gradations of disgust, just as, if you're high, you're going to have gradations of approval or gradations of admiration for those five people. Or if you've been on that 9.5% Belgian beer down at the Belgian brewery in Bishop Stortford, then you might think that Liz Truss did a great job. So that's what I mean when I talk about Sunak. But I am, and I'll tell you what, if it sounds like sympathy, it sounds like sympathy because he can't help being rich. I'm not suggesting he deserves our pity, but he can't help being rich. I mean, he could give it all away. He'd still be married to the daughter of one of the richest men in the world. He can't. So that is just, that is the only world he can inhabit, the only window he can look through first thing in the morning. What he doesn't seem to do is make any effort at all to go and have a look through other people's windows. So he was being interviewed by the peerless Beth Rigby at Sky News, and it was an exchange that I think goes to the absolute heart of the conversations we've been having increasingly about his out-of-touchness, or as Dom put it, who is he actually talking to when he says stuff like that? And I just thought it was really illuminating. Have a listen to this.
All right, for us to be Prime Minister, you're one of life's success stories. You were head boy at school, you had a career in finance that made you very wealthy. Now you're Prime Minister. How do you feel when you lose?
Sorry?
How do you feel when you lose?
How do you mean, Beth?
Well, you're a winner in life. How do you feel when you don't win?
Well, look, my focus in this job is to deliver for the country. I've set out 5 very clear priorities: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. All I'm doing every day is focus on delivering for people against those 5 priorities. I firmly believe that that's what the country wants me to do. That's what the government is committed to doing, and we're working night and day to make sure that happens.
And you lost to Liz Truss last year. Did that hurt more or less than losing over 1,000 council seats at your first test at the ballot box?
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working councillors, but the message I've taken is the country wants me to redouble our efforts to deliver for them. As I said, the 5 priorities I've set out, I believe, are the right ones: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. That's what the country wants us to focus on. That's what I am focusing on day and night, and I will keep at it.
That morning, were you quite gutted?
As I said, it was disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors. Many of them are friends and colleagues as well. But I'm going to work very hard to deliver for the country. And again, the 5 priorities I've set out, I believe, are the right ones. Those are the country's priorities: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. Day and night, that's what I'm focused on. That's what the government's focused on. And, whilst things are tough, I'm confident that things will improve and people will be able to see that we are delivering for them and improving their lives.
I don't want to be simplistic or crass, but that's just rubbish. What's he on about? I liked the line of questioning. It was an attempt by Beth Rigby to humanise him, or to at least give him a chance to be humanised. They weren't in the shower together, to the best of my knowledge. I believe the interview took place in a Japanese tea house, which, as aficionados of Japanese tea will know, or indeed Japanese tea houses will know, is a structure that has a roof but no walls. So the rain that was pouring outside was, of course, picked up by by the microphones while the interview was being conducted. So thank you to the 300 people who've just made the same joke about Beth Rigby and Rishi Sunak having a shower together. The point being that was an attempt to humanise him. That was an invitation to him to say something like, "Well, I'm like everybody else. When things go badly for me, I have sleepless nights. I lay awake at night worrying about councillors who've dedicated 30 years to actually doing quite a good job and now been handed their sandwiches wrapped in a roadmap by voters because of the incompetence of he didn't even have to say my government. He could have said my predecessors. He didn't even have to say incompetence. He could have just said the political realities that we're all facing. But he didn't seem to understand an invitation to sound human. And I know we're all supposed to be very worried about AI taking over all our jobs, but I think it might have already happened. That list, I'm just going to list. You could ask him anything. You could ask him who he fancies. Last night's game between Sheffield Wednesday and Peterborough. Who'd you fancy for that? And he said, well, I've been very clear about my 5 pledges. Halve inflation, something, waiting lists and stop the boats. It's just not normal. Who is Rishi Sunak talking to? I should give Dom a royalty on today's show, shouldn't I? That's such a good question. I don't. Is he talking to you? Are you still lapping this stuff up? Who is he talking to? And what is he talking about when it comes to pubs? Mark's in Datchworth to steer us back towards that second question. Mark, what would you like to say?
Well, I would just like to put out there, I'm just so fed up of all the misinformation that the governments, various governments have put out. The price of beer is not going down whatsoever. The retail costs have gone up to me since Kwasi Kwarteng's budget of 10%, minimum of 10% on drink, minimum of 30% on food.
Yeah.
My energy costs have trebled, if not quadrupled in some states. To give you some facts there, my electricity bill has just gone from £1,200 a month to £4,200 a month.
That's in excess of 300%, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I have to, when you sort of complain or try to complain, you must pass that on to the customer. Since when are my customers going to be paying £15 a pint? It's just never going to happen.
Well, there's a couple of places in the West End, but I don't know how well it'd go down in Datchworth.
Yeah. And we are a community pub, and we play a huge, vital part of the community because we're the adults' youth clubs. We are.
It's a nice way of putting it.
People come to mix and mingle and debate and chat, and it's just.
Where's
you're pricing them out of it.
Where's the breaking point for you? Are you near it? I hate asking this question, but you know that I have to.
No, I'm not near it. I've been doing this for 30 years now, and
you know how to navigate the choppy waters in expectation of things calming down again.
There's always a rough sea, and we will ride that out. And I think I'm fortunate enough to be able to ride that out.
Yeah,
but I'm just fed up of because as soon as you get the budget, and the beer duty is frozen, all your customers think, the price of not beer's going up, but they just need to understand, and customers are actually more educated now than ever because it's just the added costs that go with it. And staffing, my next problem is that I'm struggling so bad for staff that I'm going to have to scale down my operation. So therefore, I will be reducing my profits because I can't meet the customer's demand. So what? You'll be closing for shifts, or you'll be closing part of the pub. What does that mean on the ground? Well, that means I'm struggling for kitchen staff. So therefore, I think the only way to be able to, without killing the staff that I have, is shut the kitchens on Mondays and Tuesdays so that they can have a couple of days off a week
and still do a 5-day week.
They still do a 5-day week, but I'm reducing my income by. I mean, when does this end, though? Where does this end? Are you going to need? Presumably, you've been hit by the disappearance of young Europeans coming here to work for 2 years, learn some English, and then go home. They're going to have to bring that back in, aren't they? At some point, something like that. You would think so, but I heard the bloke who runs Itsu, he used to run Pret a Manger on the radio this morning, who just said bring in a 2-year visa for young European workers. What's not to like about that? And of course, the answer to that question is that it's freedom of movement for them, but not for our young people. It's a strange one. What would help you most overnight? Something doable. I think the most thing that I would like is the government to get hold of the energy companies and say, you need to help businesses. You need to...
Well, it's a windfall tax, isn't it?
Well, a windfall tax, but not a windfall tax that they just keep. We need to be able to offset that against our business.
So a direct relationship between any form of windfall tax and subsidies or rebates for people in business with high energy costs. Final question, Mark. Actually, second final question, because I always want to get the name of the pub. Who do you think Rishi Sunak is talking to, genuinely, with this stuff?
Voices in his head.
Behave yourself. Is that the name of your pub?
Can't say.
What's the name of the pub?
The Horns in Datchworth.
In the Horns in Datchworth. There it is. 10:45. I mean, very, very similar stories, but always slightly different wrinkles. But quite who Rishi Sunak was talking to and what Rishi Sunak was talking about is currently beyond every single one of us. It's 10:45. The pubs. What somebody think of the pubs? And you're just touching on there with the last caller in Datchet, the community role that they play. I love that, a youth club for adults. You don't see that so much anymore, simply because there aren't as many pubs around as there used to be, and also because times change. We're a lot more informed, perhaps, about the negative impacts that alcohol can have on family life and on, of course, individual health. But that notion of a hub, of it being of enormous importance to huge swathes of the population, is something that isn't hard to grasp, and yet Rishi Sunak doesn't seem to grasp anything. I don't know can we get an hour out of who is he actually talking to? When I use that phrase, by the way, can we get an hour out of it? What I mean is, do I and you have enough interesting things to say? Because we might all end up essentially saying the same thing. I'm going to play you that clip again. I want to hear that clip again, because it does seem, a few of you pointing out that it's the power of three, which is the sort of rhetorical device to hit something home, but it only works if what is being hit home is effective. And I just don't know anyone who is listening to Rishi Sunak be asked about Brexit and then blather about beer, or being asked about what it's like to lose and start blathering about waiting lists. I don't know quite who this is aimed at. It's quite bizarre. Hiten says every time he's asked an awkward question, he comes back with his 5 pledges. It's as if he's got a replay button programmed inside him. It makes my blood boil. Let's have another listen, because I just thought this was a remarkable exchange.
All right,
for us to be
Prime
focused
Minister, you're one of life's success stories. You were head boy at school, you had a career in finance that made you very wealthy. Now you're Prime Minister. How do you feel when you lose?
Sorry?
How do you feel when you lose?
How do you mean, Beth?
Well, you're a winner in life. How do you feel when you don't win?
Well, look, my focus in this job is to deliver for the country. I've set out 5 very clear priorities: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. All I'm doing every day is focus on delivering for people against those 5 priorities. I firmly believe that that's what the country wants me to do. That's what the government is committed to doing, and we're working night and day to make sure that happens.
And you lost to Liz Truss last year. Did that hurt more or less than losing over 1,000 council seats at your first test at the ballot box?
It's always disappointing to lose hard-working councillors, but the message I've taken is the country wants me to redouble our efforts to deliver for them. As I said, the 5 priorities I've set out, I believe, are the right ones: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. That's what the country wants us to focus on. That's what I am focusing on day and night, and I will keep at it.
That morning, were you quite gutted?
As I said, it is disappointing to lose hard-working Conservative councillors. Many of them are friends and colleagues as well. But I'm going to work very hard to deliver for the country. And again, the 5 priorities I've set out, I believe, are the right ones. Those are the country's priorities: to halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the votes. Day and night, that's what I'm focused on. That's what the government's focused on. And, whilst things are tough, I'm confident that things will improve and people will be able to see that we are delivering for them and improving their lives.
It's not normal, this, is it? When Gary points out, you ask him what he wants for tea, and he'd say halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. What's the weather outside like? What's it like outside, Rishi? Well, halve inflation, grow the economy, reduce debt, cut waiting lists and stop the boats. It's quite weird. And it wouldn't matter as much that he sounds like an automaton if some of the other stuff he said made sense. But he's telling publicans that they have got they've never had it so good. The price of beer's about to come down. Everyone's a winner. Adrienne is in Isleworth. Adrienne, are you a winner?
No, definitely not.
Why not?
This year's been absolutely awful. COVID was better for us than this year has been.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Because you could do the deliver, you could do the click and collect, and you could keep. Is that why? I don't know.
Well, to be fair, we had a really tough couple of years, 2020, 2021 with COVID, but the government looked after us.
That's right.
Furlough helped us, our staff. We did a lot of work in the community to keep our profile in the community and to help out the people who've helped us in the past. And we ran an online quiz night every night during COVID.
Lovely.
We collected and distributed food for the food banks. We helped with the kitchens cooking food to deliver to people who were isolated at home. So, it was a really difficult time, and it was horrible to be closed, but it was better than it's been at the moment.
Good Lord. Why? How come?
Well, we were in the unfortunate circumstance of having to renegotiate both our gas and electricity bills just at the height of the trust debacle.
Right. Oh, God.
And, we had a electricity bill which went from 15p per unit to 90p. We had a gas bill that went from 7p per unit to 18p. Yes, 600%. We went from paying just under £2,000 to well over £7,000. We were told at the time that the government would support our businesses and that we would have subsidies for up to 2 years. As soon as Trust was replaced by Sunak, that was reduced to 6 months. And we're now getting a paltry sum since March. The 6 months ended at the end of March. So a £2,000 subsidy is now reduced to £108, I think my last
I believe you now. I mean, that is, I sense that you could probably carry on, couldn't you? This is a litany of disaster, a litany of tragedy. Some of it avoidable, some of it not. I mean,
I think what people don't understand, and everyone that's phoned you so far has said the same, is that he can say that the duty on beer is coming down, but we've had a 30% rise in the cost of our food. We've had this enormous rise in the cost of our energy. We are a tenanted pub. All of our prices from our supplier across the board went up by between 5 and 10% only in March. So, and there does come a point where you just can't pass those costs on to the customers.
That's the crucial point. And your customers are less well off than ever before as well.
Absolutely. I mean, we're already charging, nearly £7 for some of our pints of beer in a suburb. We're not in the West End, and we're not doing that across the board because people won't pay that.
That's for your sort of premium brews.
Yeah, the premium brands. But I put in an awful lot of work to try and get out of the contracts that we were with Energy.
Yeah.
We ended up having to close our limited company and open a new limited company just to get out of the contracts. And I've now received a bill from YU Energy, who I'd never use ever, and please tell everybody not to. They've sent me that. Well, this is how I feel.
That is part, but I'm sure they would have an alternative interpretation. But I don't want to stop you from saying.
But they have sent me a bill for closing my genuinely closing my account for ceasing, changing my tenancy. They've sent me a bill for £14,000.
Good Lord.
Basically for not using the energy that I had contracted to buy from them.
They are having a laugh, aren't they? All of these energy companies, I don't know.
You just think that you've managed to get through it.
And they come and slap you with something like that.
And they come and slap you with something like that.
Hoi, hoi, hoi. What pub is it?
The Royal Oak in Isleworth.
Which is, I know Isleworth. I shall come and see you. I'll buy one of those £7 a pint pints.
Well, they're not quite £7.
No, I know. Well, let's not tempt fate. Adrienne,
they will be soon.
Take care. Thank you. I mean, it is up and down the country, from Liverpool to London, Bishop's Stortford, Datchford and beyond. Everyone is having exactly the same experience. So it's not a traditional phone-in question, but what on earth is Rishi Sunak talking about? Who is he talking to? I don't know. We'll squeeze in one more. Let's go. We haven't done the Midlands yet. Jill's there. Jill in Birmingham. What would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
I can only agree with your last caller.
Did you realise this was the radio programme of choice for the nation's publicans?
Oh, well, I didn't, but I do now.
We do now, don't we? Everywhere I look.
I'm a long-time listener, first-time caller.
Thank you very much.
And you do a fabulous job.
You're very kind. I'm sure you do too.
Thank you. Suppliers haven't passed any savings on to us. I'm a small independent company. I own 10 pubs, all community-led for working-class people, the salt-of-the-earth people.
Yes.
And having to pass on cost to them is impossible. 10p makes a difference to how many beers they can have. Yeah. We look after the elderly in the community. We have the man that comes in from work, at sort of tea time for a couple of pints. Some of the costings have gone up by 13%. We've been hit with 4 price rises in this last year. And again, what your previous caller said, with gas and electric and mortgages for me, the rates have gone through the roof. The interest rates have gone through the roof. It's just almost impossible. We thought we'd got through the pandemic okay, and we breathed this great sigh of relief that we were still here.
Yeah.
And this year has been the worst year ever. Costs just keep rising and rising and rising.
And that's not the government's fault entirely. Some of it, every problem is exacerbated by Brexit, but energy costs and consequences of Ukraine, which will affect food costs and things like that, they hold true across the world, across our part of the world. But when he's asked, when you hear him, and I've played it 2 or 3 times today, what's he talking about?
He's just so out of touch with reality, with the normal person.
He is,
which
isn't
is
he?
What we all are. He's so out of touch, it's unbelievable.
It is getting that. I think I've resisted that a bit, but it is getting impossible to conclude anything else. You ask him a simple question, and I've had publicans queuing up today. It's quite nice. It's the other way around. It's normally me queuing up to get served by you, but all the publicans are queuing up to get served by me today. And you're all saying exactly the same thing, which is he is not describing the world in which we live. He's talking unmitigated gibberish.
And I think the problem is as well that your own customers listen to what he's saying and they don't understand why the cost of the beer is not coming down and being fed through to them.
God, so that makes your life worse.
They think I'm making loads of money and I'm going to go into early retirement, which obviously is the opposite. But
that's a very good point.
They're wondering why the hell is it not being passed on to them?
So who is he talking to?
Because we're not having it.
Yeah, he's talking to people that he's misleading. You've got 10 pubs. You can't name them all. Do you want to name a couple, Jill?
Yeah, so I have the Duncow in Wellington, Talford. I have the Four Crosses in Stafford. My company is called the Little Pub Company, and I'm all over the Midlands.
Well,
led community pubs.
Do you have any near Kidderminster?
No, I'm afraid not.
You didn't go. Well, there you go. That's something for your to-do list.
Yes.
Thank you, Jill. Sorry, that was a slightly curt conclusion, but it's already a little bit late for this. Okay. As I get older, I'm still pretty much a spring chicken, but as I get older, I do wonder whether or not I can continue to get away with the old, I don't know anything about this, it's all a bit modern and scary, give me a call and help me out. But I am going to do that again today. We touched on AI once, right? And it was an education for me. And we're going to talk about it again today. And my position has shifted quite profoundly on this. And I'm going to tell you why. I wonder if you have been listening for too long to this programme. You'll know what I mean when I talk about Swiss hedges. It's a bit like gully suckers. These sort of simplistic little aid memoirs that I use to remind myself of easy ways into difficult subjects. So Swiss hedges, it probably isn't even true. Do not disabuse me of this notion, please, if it's not true. But I remember as a kid really wrestling with the idea, really being drawn to the idea. Very simply, when I was even younger, it was explained to me, I think by a geography teacher, that there were laws in place in Switzerland to keep the countryside looking nice. So even though it would cost farmers more money to have nice hedgerows and sort of lovely rural landscapes, rather than tearing it all down and turning it all into massive fields of wheat that the Swiss Theresa May could perhaps run through when she was feeling particularly delinquent, I There's a good illustration of the difference between Sunak and May. That's what I'm talking about. I'm no fan of Theresa May particularly, although I think she's the best of the last four. But when she's asked, did she do anything naughty as a child? And she just didn't, bless her. She didn't do anything naughty, but she tried. She said, well, we used to run through fields of wheat. I honestly believe, hand on heart, that was probably the naughtiest thing she did as a little girl. And you ask Rishi Sunak, how do you feel about losing? And he can't go there. He can't even open up his personality enough to say, awful, I felt awful, I hate it. So there you go. There's a difference between someone being invited to be human and sort of having a swing and a miss, and someone being invited to be human and not understanding the question or not understanding the invitation. So the Swiss model, as I understood it, was that governments would subsidise farmers to keep the countryside looking nicer rather than prioritising profit over everything else, right? So park that thought. That's thought number one. Then we move to the UK water companies. So if anyone's keeping notes, we've got Swiss hedges, Swiss hedgerows, sounds a bit better. Swiss hedges might be a financial thing. We've got Swiss hedgerows, and now we've got British, or English actually, English water companies. Now, if you can take one thing away from the stories we've been sharing about English water companies in the last few years, it is this. They have prioritised profit over absolutely everything. The idea of prioritising feces being pumped into our seas and our rivers above profit has never occurred to them. If they have the choice, here's 10 quid, what are you going to do with it? Reduce the amount of poo being pumped into the river around the corner, or keep it? What are you going to do, lads? We're going to keep it. The only circumstances in which we will spend it on reducing the amount of poo being pumped into the waterways of England is if we are absolutely forced to. And do you know what? A fine isn't going to work either, because guess what? Come here a minute. You see this tenner, right? We can spend it on stopping poo being pumped into the rivers, or we can keep it. And if we keep it and we get into trouble, guess what? They're going to fine us £1. What are you going to do, lads? Let's keep the money. Let's keep the money, boss. So that is the big takeaway. I mean, all the talk about nationalisation and privatisation, free markets and neoconservatism and neoliberalism, it's all a load of bunkum. Sometimes it boils down to the simplest principle of all, which is someone has got 10 quid. They've got a choice to do what would be best for everybody, including customers, country, community, or for themselves. And unless they are forced, this is why the Tufton Street mob are so hideous, because they actively and deliberately shill for the people that want to keep the tenner. Always, always, always doing the bidding of the people that want to keep a tenner, never telling you who it is that pays their wages. Guess what? It's the people that always want to keep the tenner. So that is, if you like, the opposite of the Swiss hedgerows. Those are your two extremes of intervene, and there'll be better examples than the Swiss hedgerows. Of course there will. I mean, all subsidy in a way. I read this morning that Jeremy Hunt is trying to pay Land Rover, is it 500 million quid in order to encourage them not to build a battery plant abroad? I mean, that's just tragic. It's another Brexit angle, isn't it? The idea that it's going to be such an attractive place to do business that the Chancellor has to find £500 million to bribe people not to go to the obviously and objectively more attractive destinations to open a new plant. And of course, it may not even work. I mean, we'd have to wait and see. It may not work. They may not come here. I'll find the story for you in a minute. I don't think I should do it while I'm broadcasting live, because the noise of the pages turning is no doubt almost as distracting as the noise of the rain falling while Beth Rigby was inviting Rishi Sunak to pretend to be human for 5 minutes. So those are your two extremes. Government intervention, subsidy, support, being prioritised over profit, if you like. Or the absolutely rampant free market insanity that has in recent years taken hold here, which hopefully reached its apotheosis with Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng arriving in Downing Street, numbers 10 and 11 hopefully reached its apotheosis there, but you never know, because the ghouls and vampires responsible for those ludicrous economic policies remain very much in receipt of constant invitations to the broadcasting studios of the UK, and not to mention the newspapers. So then we come to AI, right? And two stories, really. The first is Rishi Sunak calling for curbs on AI, new rules to tackle the threat This amid concerns that regulation in the UK is too lax. You couldn't make it up, could you? You got Rees-Mogg and his fellow penny farthings queuing up to tell us we need less regulation. I don't really know what that means, but my dad told me, and therefore I've been repeating it since I was 6. We need less regulation. But anybody sensible understands that regulation equals protection, with a few excessive examples. And Sunak saying yesterday the government's approach will evolve. Change of tone. So there's 2 angles to the risk of AI. The first is spreading disinformation, and the second is large-scale job losses. And I'm looking at the second one today because that's the front of the Times. Sunak, rules to curb AI threats will keep pace with technology. And front page of the Mail, is this the start of the great AI jobs bloodbath? BT says it's replacing 10,000 workers with artificial intelligence technology. I'll say that again, actually. I'm glossing over it a bit. BT says it's replacing 10,000 workers with artificial intelligence technology. So over the next 7 years as part of a wider program of layoffs. So it's cutting jobs through increased automation, which I think does translate. I don't think the Mail's off on a mad one here for once. I do think that translates as replacing human workers with AI workers. And this is where we come back to the water companies, not the Swiss hedgerows, because why wouldn't they? You know, if every publican we spoke to, and publicans are a slightly different example, aren't they? Because you need humanity. You need humanity to do some jobs, but possibly not as many as we think you do. If you're running a business, I think the first person we spoke to about this who really brought it home was someone in marketing, and they can use AI to write copy. So I've got friends that write copy for a living, and not just journalists who would also be under threat from this, but people who work on the other side of the commercial fence, people who write marketing literature. So, you know, when you get a leaflet through your door, or you're on a website, or you read one of those adverts in a newspaper or a magazine that's got quite a lot of text, it's quite text. People write that stuff. It is copywritten. And AI are already doing that. So the risk, the threat is real. And this is where the profound change in my view has come from. I think this is... And I think I probably owe an apology to someone. I'm not sure who, but I think I may have been a little bit dismissive when other people started saying this could be a huge threat to our current way of doing things. Do you know, I'd stop myself there saying our current way of life, because it sounds even more chilling, doesn't it? But the more I learn and the more I read, the more I see a future where thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people in the near, not distant future will be replaced by AI. And what the hell happens when that happens? What happens? When white-collar workers suffer their own post-industrial revolution type experience, you know? We talk a lot, not as much as we should, but it's, I think, key to understanding so-called red wall issues about the collapse of production in this country, the collapse of manufacturing. The statistics are not quite as bad as much of the rhetoric suggests, but you go to a community that used to rely upon a steelworks or a coal mine, and you will see that very little, if anything, has moved into the space vacated by heavy industry. And when that happens to white-collar workers, I don't know what the future begins to look like. Where do you turn? You lose your job. So 10,000 at BT, that's one example, one story, one of the first to go. Where do those 10,000 people go? And then every other communications company, every other comparable commercial enterprise also gets rid of thousands and thousands of people. What happens? So the question I have for you is not as intelligent as I can't call my own words intelligent. The question I've got for you is a little bit more simplistic than the analysis I've just had a crack at. That's why I use the Swiss head, because unless governments tell companies not to use AI, but to carry on using people instead, even though that will take daily bites out of profit, I don't see any way of avoiding a mildly apocalyptic future. And governments aren't really going to do that, because What business, especially if you've got a choice internationally about where you go, and I hesitate to bring Brexit into it because, of course, I bring Brexit into everything, but we've already made ourselves desperately unattractive for business, as the car industry has been explaining this week. We've made ourselves considerably less attractive than we used to be. Let's not say, some poor soul on Twitter sent me a story about a business opening up in Belfast as proof that Brexit was doing well, and you sometimes think even I can't reach the parts that kind of contribution to public discourse is coming from. How little attention would you have to be paying to events not to understand why Northern Ireland is uniquely positioned to attract business in the United Kingdom, while still thinking that you're possessed of pungent opinions about Brexit? I don't get it. I get not knowing anything, and I get having very strong opinions, but I'm never going to understand, as long as I live, the combination of not knowing anything and having very strong opinions. Although I suppose I should, given that people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, Nadine Dorries and Daniel Hannan can rise to some of the highest offices in the land. But on the AI, unless governments actively prevent companies from replacing humans with technology, I think we might be screwed. I think the UK might be in an even worse position than everywhere else in the world, so everywhere else in Europe, because we're already less attractive. We've already got a chancellor asking £500 million, offering £500 million to a car company, begging them to open a factory here and not somewhere else. He wouldn't have to do that if we hadn't left the European Union. And now, unless they're prepared to say, oh, and by the way, if you do open a factory here, you're going to have to use humans, not AI. Do you see what you see what I mean, don't you? I don't need to say any more. That's rude. I think that's really scary. And I also think that quite a few of us who might be patting ourselves on the back for having the kind of work that isn't going to be affected by AI, I think we might be in for quite a rude awakening as well. I think I'll be okay. It's you I'm worried about. 18 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Your job, right? How vulnerable is it to AI? Your job in particular. And I'm particularly keen to hear from you if you think we'll be surprised to learn that you're worried about being replaced by AI. And what kind of jobs are we talking about? What will be these jobs, these 10,000 jobs at BT? What will those jobs be? What sort of jobs are we already seeing being replaced by AI? If you're a boss and you're on the ball, I'm not here to examine your conscience, because I don't think this is any different from the invention of the spinning jenny or Industrial Revolution innovations that suddenly allowed you to replace 100 children working in your mill with one piece of machinery, swings and roundabouts. There are silver linings to these clouds. But if you're a boss, are you prepared to tell me stuff off the record? No one's listening. Just 1.46 million people. Are you prepared to tell me stuff that you haven't told your workforce yet? All of which is a slightly roundabout way of saying, how big is this going to be? Just how big is this going to be? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And for the fans of the 20-minute monologue, that wasn't bad, was it? It is 11:22, and it is the threat of AI, but we're going to have to start having a proper conversation about it, which means you have to tell me off if I start doing my childish sort of, it sounds like Star Trek shtick. I've also just been sent quite an interesting article about the possibility of radio presenters being replaced by GPT, being replaced by AI, and I think it's a good job I go on so long, frankly, and put in lots of ums and ahs and talk about my family and my background and give you sort of... It's a good job I overshare, because AI couldn't do that. I guess that's what that makes a difference, but it wouldn't take them long to fake it. John's in Chiswick to kick things off. John, what have you got?
Hi there, James.
Hello, mate.
It's actually Josh, but never mind.
It is Josh. No, it's my fault. I read it wrong. Sorry.
That's quite all right.
I'm in an unfamiliar studio, Josh. So I'll blame my tools.
That's quite all right. So yeah, just to say, James, I'm a TV producer. I work in documentaries, and a big part of my job is developing ideas.
Yes.
So, the initial idea I can have, but then you have to write it up and write slick copy to try and sell it to broadcasters and channels and that kind of thing.
Yes.
And I thought I was relatively safe because I work in a creative industry, and everyone said, AI being able to do that would be 50 years away.
Yeah.
I had a go with ChatGPT the other day, and it was literally terrifying.
Oh, no.
I gave it a parameter. I said, can you write me a documentary pitch, keep it sort of light and comic, and punchy for Celebrity X doing thing Y.
Yeah.
And it came.
Was
up
it
with
monkey tennis?
It wasn't quite. I have drilled those depths before, James. But
Dog Borstal, if Palomine worked on Dog Borstal, that was when he gave up.
No, that's it. I knew of someone once who worked on a show called Michael Jackson Live Seance as well. So there are no depths to which these things won't be plumbed. But
not on this occasion.
No, but it was pretty good. Right? I mean, it wasn't perfect. It was pretty vague and generic. In some ways, actually, it's a great tool because it's a good starting point. It gives you a structure that you can then flesh out. But I just worry that that's a big part of television. And if someone can get, that would normally take a producer maybe an afternoon to write something like that, and it was done in 10 minutes, So
how much of it did you submit?
I didn't actually submit anything. It was just yeah, 100%. It was just a sort of experiment because there's a bit of a work drought at the moment in the industry. Sure. But I was just going to say, with AI and people doing stuff, I've read a few articles about the future of work, and there was talking about automation. This was pre-Chat GBT, saying, well, maybe then there needs to be a universal basic income, and maybe then you tax the companies if they use a robot worker instead of a human worker. So you could maybe think about that with AI, but then the people who own the technology are the very big tech companies, your Amazons, your Googles and your Microsofts, and, they don't have the best record for paying taxes. In the countries where they are,
or doing anything but prioritise profit over everything else.
Of course, and I mean, they're a business and it's shareholders. But I don't know. Have you ever seen a film called Elysium by Neil Blomkamp?
No, but about 5 people have texted me that in the last 2 minutes.
Really, yeah, because it's a pretty on the nose sort of sci-fi socialist revolution parable, which has its appeals in some senses.
Sure.
But the picture of the Earth that it paints is more in terms of robots sort of taking over manual work. But there's a sort of super high-end space station where all the elites live, where they have everything. And basically the entire planet Earth is like a favela. And it's, the only jobs that humans do are where they're cheaper than being a machine.
I mean, it's a dystopian trope, isn't it? Even the Hunger Games is a bit like that, isn't it? When you get
exactly.
down to it.
I do, without wanting to be completely sort of morose and
no, but this is what I mean about the concentration of wealth at the very top. Unless we completely change the way we look at the world, I don't see how else things shake down. Except that I mean, it's already a tiny, tiny tip of the pyramid. It's going to get tinier and tinier. Well, I can't say the bottom of the pyramid gets bigger because then it'll stop being a pyramid. But you see what I mean. Everyone who can be replaced will be replaced. Who's left apart from capital, apart from owners? Yeah,
that's it. And the only thing humans will do is where they are cheaper than a robot. I mean, I think the only people that are really safe are in this new AI world are plumbers and hairdressers. And I know you had hairdressers on a few weeks ago talking about the crisis in the industry. So I know it's not all
sports people and entertainers.
Sports people, yeah, and entertainers. But I think. I mean,
there it is. We're all going to talk about it. I wonder when we'll actually start panicking. I wonder if people are panicking. Anyone listening to this now is genuinely panicking. Someone who's a bit more immersed in it than you or I are. So it could realistically. Has anyone done a book yet? Has anyone done a kind of just shown what it would be like if you got AI to write a book?
I don't know.
You do non-fiction quite easily, I would have thought, from what I'm learning.
Yes, it can, and it can do adverts. I've got a mate who works in marketing. He lives in the States now, and he had some fun with it, getting it to write really obscure things, really obscure job adverts for absolutely ridiculous and actually quite comic scenarios. And it kind of got it. It's when this thing can make jokes. I mean, I think you're having it writing sitcoms probably within about 5 or 10 years.
Blimey, probably for ITV to start with. Josh, take care, mate. It's coming up to 11:29. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Genuine fear. When should we panic? Answer, possibly now. I'm not going to put Rob in Idiot's Corner because I think he means well. And it's going back to the topic we did in the last hour. But I'm going to just show you something, mate. You say, balanced commentary as normal. Rishi wants to get across his message. Beth Rigby wants to focus on hers. Why do you condemn Sunak for repeating his message? But it's okay for journalists to keep asking nonsense questions like, how do you feel when you lose? Over and over. Rob, I'm just going to show you something really, really simple, okay? I'm talking directly to you now. How do you feel when you lose? I would genuinely like to know. It would tell me so much about you. It would tell me about your conscience. It would tell me about your moral universe. It would tell me about your priorities, your capacity for empathy and compassion, or self-pity, or resilience, whatever it might be. I would learn a lot if you would tell me how you feel when you lose. So it's not a nonsense question. And repeating 5 pledges over and over again in response to an invitation to be a bit human is not normal. But at least we now have at least one answer to the question of who exactly is Rishi Sunak talking to. It's 11:30. Thomas Watts is here with your headline. 34 minutes after 11. God, everyone's a party pooper today. Catherine says, James, you were just saying that entertainers would be safe from AI. Have you seen the new Abbot show? Yes, I have. And you're right. Chris is on the Pennines, it says here. A very specific location. Chris, what's on your mind? Well, there you go. So specific, he's not actually there. Chris, can you hear me? See, if it was AI, we'd probably... Shall I see if Dan is in Rutland? Chris, what's wrong? What are you doing? No, he's gone. This is fantastic. You wouldn't get this if I had AI.
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. What are you doing?
I had you on mute for some reason, which has never happened before.
Big national radio. You can't put me on mute.
Well, there's a first time for everything. And I was about to say I'm a first-time listener and hopefully you'll go easy on me, but that's not going to happen now after I've already screwed it up.
There are bad starts and there are bad starts. This is off the charts for bad starts. Go on.
I'm really sorry. However, hopefully I'll bring you a bit of a reasonably unique perspective to the conversation. I'm probably going to follow some of the similar themes to the last caller who was excellent, actually. But I do work for, I guess, one of these companies that you could argue is democratizing the technology. So I work near the technology every day,
right?
And I kind of see it developing as a bit of a profession. And as I was saying to the lady on the line, I think my worry about it is, which again is a similar theme, is that it's a very specialist skill set to deploy this stuff. And there's very few people that can actually do it. And whilst there's lots of initiatives to bridge that gap, I mean, you've heard the Prime Minister talking about us all being trained to do data and AI and maths and all that kind of stuff. You know, the reality is that if you remove 10,000 jobs tomorrow, those 10,000 jobs are not going to go and get AI data jobs. That's just not going to happen.
No.
And that person that runs that business, as you've already said, is going to be more profitable, and therefore the income inequality that we already have is going to continue to rise, and that's the worry, and that's from someone that sells this stuff for a living and sees its potential.
Because for any economy, even if those 10,000 people went off and set up microbreweries and they all did well, you still, for them to do well, would need 1 million people with enough money to be visiting microbreweries, and this concentration, this reduction in work, apart from jobs that are going to be cheaper to hire a human than AI, which is probably going to be non-existent at some point. I mean, what's the most positive potential future here? Because I can't see it personally.
Yeah, I think it's more nuanced than that, and I think.
Do you really? You're just going to get into Panem. What's it called in the Hunger Games? Is it Panem, the city where all the rich people live?
No.
Yes.
I just think that it's one of those that is gathering pace because of the chat GBT stuff that's just been released. So there are a lot more people are talking about it. And I think that's another danger, isn't it? I think that, and this is why this show's so good, because it certainly brings balance to a lot of people. And I mean that as a compliment, me included. But I think there's always that worry, isn't it, that then there's this sensationalism that happens through social media and whatever, that it's going to do bad and it's going to do wrong, and there's not enough balance of what it can do to create good. And I think ultimately we just need a government that understands how they can go about regulating it, and then they can iterate when they do that as things occur, because it is that whichever way we look at it, it's the next big transformation of our time.
Yes,
100%.
it is, and it could be up there with the Industrial Revolution, which I slightly misrepresented earlier. It wasn't, that turned us from an agrarian economy. Everyone was sort of working in fields and small holdings, and suddenly they shipped tons and tons of people into factories, women usually and children, and I mean huge, massive social change, which you'd hope we might have some safeguards against, given that we're supposed to be a bit more advanced or a bit more civilized now. But I don't know whether or not you're being naive when you imagine an alternative to companies being able to prioritize profit over everything else. I just point you at all the crap in your local river, Chris. I mean, that's what happens when companies...
Oh, we're back there.
Yeah, we are though, aren't we?
Yeah, it is a tough one. It's a tough one, but all I can say is that my main worry is that it could get out of hand unless it has proper regulation.
Well, that's my main worry as well, and
yeah. We'll agree on that then.
Yeah, no, I think we agree on everything, but the current direction of political traffic is people who don't really understand what they're talking about, constantly banging on about why we need to remove regulations, and they're sponsored by people who do know what they're talking about. They want to get rid of health and safety legislation, worker protections, all of those things, and they're going to become ever more valuable. They're going to become invaluable as this technology takes hold. What would you do if you were completely cynical and you wanted to be on the right side of history?
I mean, it's about education, isn't it, really?
No. You've got to be completely cynical. If you were going to look after yourself and nobody else, knowing what you know, what would you do now?
I wouldn't have rang today, and I'd just continue to sell stuff and take my salary. Because I'll be honest, James, like I do feel conflicted at times because I do work for one of those businesses that you often reference. I won't say who because that's not right. But they're very good to me and have been good to me and my family, and they provide me with the life that I've got. But equally, I do get that things need to change in this country, and I'll be totally upfront with you. I come from a very blue family,
sure,
and I'm a very red person now,
okay.
And rightly or wrongly, and I've crossed over to that side because, not to go too off topic, but I think the person that runs the Red Men, of which I've listened to that podcast you did, I think he's got a better team, and I would rather have a steadfast person that I trust and I know isn't going to lie run the country through these challenges we're going to face, of which this is one. So that's what I'll finish on, I guess. But
no, that's incredibly powerfully put, and it preempted. I just stopped myself from interrupting you, actually, because when you said, I do what I do, I look after my family, I'm never going to judge you for doing that. Not for a nanosecond, but I was about to say that's what politicians are for. They are supposed to come in and make decisions and do things in the hope of improving society or making things better for the general good, for the majority rather than the minority. And if I were to oversimplify left versus right-wing politics is always about making things better for a tiny minority and kidding the majority that then with a chance of getting into it. Thank you, Chris. Which takes us back to the Hunger Games. Panem's the whole place, isn't it? That's the whole sort of state. I'm thinking of the capital. You get into the capital, you're golden. Otherwise, you're that's the dystopian meme. That's always the dystopian model. Dan's in Rutland. Dan, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. You asked a couple of callers ago if anyone was panicked yet.
Yes.
I am.
Go on. What do you do?
And I'm a photographer stroke designer.
Okay.
And I oversee the sort of art side of an on and offline publishing company.
Right.
And up until about a month ago, I'd heard bits and bobs and read things and hadn't really taken it too seriously.
Yeah.
And then on a shoot last week, somebody started sort of talking about it, and I sort of was a bit blasé about it, and they said, well, try it, see.
Right.
So I went onto Bing, and I put martini shot in darkly lit bar.
Yeah.
And immediately I was given a perfect photograph of a martini shot in a darkly lit bar. And it wasn't just a photograph, it was a really well-composed, stylish, well-lit, completely original, completely copyright-free image.
Why is it copyright-free?
Because it's a one-off. It's just responding to your input.
But they found it in the search engine. Found that picture. It didn't create.
No, it's created, completely created.
Oh, that's what I didn't understand. That's the bit I didn't understand.
Yeah, it's completely created, taking millions of samples from various images to sort of illustrate it to such a high detail.
It's both original and unoriginal at the same time, isn't it?
Well, yeah.
Spooky.
But, I've been doing it for 25 years, so I went from a picture of a cocktail taking a week because of having to shoot on film and get things scanned, and to then digital, and now it's instant.
And you saw that and thought, crikey.
I saw that and thought that's not far off what I would shoot.
That's
and it's not far off what a business would,
and
pay good money for, and it's instant.
And it'll cost the client 20p.
Exactly, and it's instant.
Yikes.
You don't have to arrange a shoot, you don't have to hire a bar, you don't have to get a bartender to make the drink, you don't have to have a stylist.
Lighting.
You literally just type the words in and it's there instantly.
Yeah, I mean, it's an odd thing, isn't it? An odd example of why it can be chilling, but it just cuts straight to the heart of your livelihood. That's why I think it hit you so hard, and you've communicated that really well to the rest of us.
And I thought I was completely safe. Something like that. In the same way as people think hairdressers are safe. No one knows where we're going to be in 5 years' time.
That obviously hit some nerves, that hairdresser's phone in a couple of weeks ago. I think, but for that reason, actually, because that subconscious thought of, hang on a minute, I thought hairdressers would be okay, but no, you're right, and I can hear. So you weren't even conscious of the clock, but now the ticking is loud. Am I right?
Well, yeah, completely, and not just for me, but for the business that I work for. Because we spend a lot of our time
putting stuff
sort
together,
of reporting websites, of people that have stolen our imagery, stolen our copy, sort of reproducing what we do. But now they can do it, and via AI, just change it slightly, so we would never be able to find it.
So you wouldn't be able to prove that it was yours.
Exactly, and it wouldn't look like ours either. It just looks similar.
And just enough of a tweak. I suppose the only words of comfort, and they're no comfort to you, but thank you, Dan. The idea that we've dealt with video didn't kill the radio star is probably the crassest way I can put it. We're often presented with huge technological changes and moral panic comes fast behind them, but I can't currently see what the escape route would look like on something like this, and that's why the notion of thousands and thousands of people suddenly being redundant, suddenly being rendered redundant is that's pretty huge. You're going to be looking at civil unrest on a fairly grand scale if people are very, very suddenly robbed of their means to sustain their lifestyles, and it would be coming, if you like, straight in at the middle. It wouldn't be coming from the bottom up as it usually does historically. God, this is interesting, but also also very unnerving. It's 11:45. It is very nearly 10 to 12, and the conversation about AI continues. Just to lighten the mood slightly, here's a phrase you've never heard before. Here's Matt Hancock. Wait. Matt Hancock giving an extraordinary interview to my newsagents colleagues, John Sopel and Lewis Goodall, but also unintentionally offering up some advice on how you could resist the march of AI. The trick is to keep mentioning that you're a human being. And then you need some sort of law in place that prevents you from not being a human being if you keep mentioning that you're a human being. But if you want to hear a masterclass, a veritable study in self-pity and, I think, borderline delusion, then this is it. I'd also say I've known Lewis Goodall for some time, almost entirely professionally. But I don't know that I've ever, you won't be able to see the pictures, but I'd urge you to go and have a look at them on Global Player. I don't know that I've ever seen his patience stretched quite as much as it is during parts of this interview, which is superbly conducted by John and Lewis, and it provides you with an indication of why that podcast is changing the game, is doing so well. Have a little listen to this. The first voice you will hear, so it's John and Lewis that are there, and Matt Hancock is the subject of the interview. It's just nuts, actually. And the first voice you will hear is John Sopel's.
But what has happened to you over the past 2 years? In office, then you're forced to resign over in relationship
falling in love with somebody.
Falling in love. Well,
falling in love and breaking your own rules.
You're the one actually. Just stop.
You're the one who mentioned...
Stop. I am Lewis. Stop. I'm a human being, right?
Yeah. And you're, okay. And you're a Secretary of State.
Don't interrupt me now, because I'm going to say something that I'd like you to listen to. I'm a human being. John's question is leading up to essentially how do you cope with this amount of stuff as a human being? And part of the answer is that, of course, politicians, have to take the rough with the smooth. And I have learned a huge amount about resilience. But I also now am just not interested in having people just go over old coals again and again and again. It's not fair and it's not right, because we are human too.
Of course,
and I have put myself through the most extraordinary amount of scrutiny over everything that happened, and the inquiry will rightly do that again in a proper format for learning the lessons for the country, and I'm enthusiastic about playing my part in that. But I'm also now perfectly willing and totally within my rights to say,
But you chose to be in public life. You chose to be the Secretary of State. You could have walked away at any time. So it is perfectly legitimate for people and journalists to continue to ask you questions about your record in that time. You were, by your own admission, it was an enormous event of global import.
Right. And what I'm saying is, absolutely. And I have answered.
You talk about resilience, but it doesn't sound very resilient when you're answering in that way.
No, because actually, I'm now leaving Parliament, right? I care about the future of the country and about the future of the Conservative Party. So I want to talk about these things. But I'm also a human being, right?
Of course.
And one of the reasons, so I'm absolutely up for scrutiny on the substance, but I'm also, I think it's also reasonable to say enough is enough.
Well, I don't know what to make of that. But anyway, won't someone think of poor little Matt Hancock? Also, get lost, mate. You didn't lose your job because you fell in love with somebody. You lost your job because you were snogging her in the office in direct contravention of lockdown rules. I mean, it's just that level that no wonder he doesn't want to be asked questions. If you were spending your life telling porky pies, you'd probably be very in favour of banning questions as well. But anyway, I just thought it was interesting for two reasons. Number one, good God, how low can they go? And number two, that's how you deal with fears that you might be AI generated. Rishi Sunak will start doing that next. He'll say, look, I am a human being, and here are my 5 pledges. I am a human being, and here are my 5 pledges. I've got 5. What do you want for tea, Rishi? 5 pledges. So that's what Hancock does instead. He just keeps repeating, lest anyone be in any doubt whatsoever that he is, in fact, a human being. Back to AI. Stuart's in Woolwich. Stuart, what do you reckon?
Morning, James. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Good. I'm really glad we're talking about this today because, in my opinion, it's just not something people are talking about enough.
No, I kind of agree.
You've asked 2 questions today. You've asked, what jobs do we reckon are safe from AI, and how terrified should we be of it? And I really wanted to call in because I personally am absolutely terrified.
Really?
Yes, because in my opinion, no job is safe from AI. And what I think really needs to be talked about more is why that is the case.
Go on.
And so the way I see it, the majority of people are not taking the opportunity to educate themselves on how these things do the things they do, the way they operate, the way they learn, the way they're trained. And it was actually something you said earlier on, right? You said that you reckon entertainers, and your job in particular, is one that seems pretty safe. And I just wanted to, why would you say that is? Why would you say you think that?
Because I think of, I would have probably said, before you made me wonder what it is that I've got wrong, I would probably said entertainers even more than my job because of the alchemy of entertainment, because it is organic, visceral, because those connections are impossible to analyse. But of course they're not, are they? If you find a million examples of what works, it's just like our friend's photograph of a martini. You just push them all together, and what comes out is the sum total of a million successful examples, and therefore that will be a successful example itself. I think the reason I talked about my job in that context is because I just read something about how what draws people to radio presenters is going to be very hard to emulate. So even if I was AI, and even if it sounded exactly like me, on some level, you're listening to this and you know that I'm not real and I don't have children, so why should I be listening to him talk about childcare? Or why should I know he doesn't pay bills, so why should I be listening to him talk about bills? So I think you're right, probably, that way more people than we currently realise are vulnerable to it. But the more your job involves imagination, the more time you've probably got before the risk of replacement is real.
It's interesting that you say imagination there, because that's actually, if you were to ask me, that's one of the things that these models are really, really good at.
Yes.
The way that the sort of what people are, AI, quote unquote, people really, what we're talking about here is generative large language models. And briefly what that is it's most of the advancements in the technology that have come on scarily fast.
That's the point. Faster than anyone was expecting, even people in the sector, I think.
Yeah, and even within the past 6 months.
Elon Musk.
Or probably the 6 weeks. Yeah, like all that. They've recently,
started working in ways that allow them to improve themselves, right? And let me just talk about that briefly.
Well, we haven't got a huge amount of time. I want to squeeze in at least one more call.
Yeah.
What do you do? What is your sector that makes you more worried than most?
So I'm a trained actor.
Okay.
And for years I've been concerned about that in particular because, so for ages, right, a couple of years ago, you started getting these ads on YouTube and the internet for programs that they were like voiceover programs. You could give them a text and they would generate a human voice for you to use in your ad or your video to produce your content. And they were everywhere and they all sounded the same. And I was like, okay, this is impressive and possible, but do people really care?
Yeah.
Right. But then the thing now is that there's so much data of human speech, and actually of your speech on the internet, for example, all on YouTube. There's so much data that these things have access to, and that's the regulatory side of it, is that there's no control over what these language models can access. You can give them anything and any data, and you can train them to do anything you can collect enough data on. So if you collect a set of data of whatever it is they train them on, 10,000 points of data, say, 10,000 examples, say there's 10,000 clips of you on the internet doing a bit on LBC. You give them 10,000 clips of you, and they say, cool, and it looks at it, it learns it, and then it emulates you.
Give us a new one on this topic, and up it comes, and it would be very, very persuasive.
Now, you then say to it, okay, well done, you can do James O'Brien. Generate me 10,000 new James O'Brien bits.
God forbid. God save us all.
Yep. And then you can tell it to look at those 10,000 new James O'Brien bits it's just generated.
And that will be it. That will be like going down a rabbit hole on YouTube, and you'll be there for just as long as it would take for me to present a radio show, and it would cost nothing. I mean, in a great... Stuart, I've got a crack on, mate. I've taken you right up to the wire, and yeah, I mean, the causes for concern are immense. We're going to have to ration this, because I think it's a subject we need to add to our list of regular features. So we'll need to take a view on how often we come back round to it, because it's a live story. It's actually unlike most regular features in that it will be developing. There'll be a gap between our two conversations. So let's say we wait a month or a fortnight or 2 months, and things will be even more obvious, even clearer, even more acute than they are today. I think Stuart brought that home better than any other call. It was great callers all round, though. It's Friday. I like to do something a little bit light-hearted at 12 o'clock on a Friday, and I've got two choices. One's considerably more light-hearted than the other. I'm currently leaning towards the tragedy of people who aren't getting married because they're frightened they won't be able to throw a big enough party. It is 3 minutes after 12, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I've got an even crazier clip of Matt Hancock. Do you want to hear it? He's been doing the rounds, presumably in expectation of... landing some sort of media career, or in hope of landing some sort of media career. 320 grand he got for going on I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Do you want to hear another bit? This is him giving a speech somewhere to some people. I think it's arguably even odder than his encounter with John Sopel and Lewis Goodall. Just have a listen to this.
I'm a normal person now. I'm not a Conservative MP, right? And it's just be normal, like the people who we represent. That's what we need to do. That's a really good starting point.
I'm not often lost for words. I'll play that again shortly, just to give myself time to find some words to say. But goodness me, have another listen to that. Matt Hancock.
I'm a normal person now. I'm not a Conservative MP, right? And it's just be normal, like the people who we represent. That's what we need to do. That's a really good starting point.
I give up. It is 4 minutes after. I'm a normal person. What am I thinking of? Oh, it's that thing, isn't it, with the dog on children's television? We're ordinary men. You must be familiar with that. It's one of the funniest things you've ever seen. Corpsing on live telly is always brilliant. But when you're corpsing with a puppet, there's something truly magical about it. We're normal men. What does it say? We're innocent men. We're normal men. We're innocent men. That's why. Play it once more, Keith.
Now, I'm not a Conservative MP, right? And it's just be normal, like the people who we represent. That's what we need to do. That's a really good starting point.
I'm a normal man. We're just normal men. Oh, anyway, strange times. The accent is the accent that the comedy Dog does on children's television, whose name I should be able to remember but can't currently. Anyway, all of that has absolutely nothing to do with what's under discussion for the rest of the programme. I love talking about marriage, but not as much as I used to do. I used to get on my right old high horse about this. I suppose I have to mention on occasion some of the stuff I used to get horribly wrong, because thankfully for you weren't listening to this programme back when I used to get this sort of stuff horribly, horribly wrong. I'm sure I still get lots of stuff horribly wrong, but this was arguably, this and obesity were arguably the two areas of our shared experience where I was at my most obnoxious. So I was one of those idiots who thought that obesity was all in the mind, and that if you ate less and exercised more, everything would be fine, and that, you need to be rude to people in order to make them realise that they've got to. Those stories never go away, do they? And then the other one was marriage. I think I find this even harder to believe, looking back, than I do my obnoxious positions on obesity. When Ollie in Oxford pointing out, the more that you insist you're normal, the less likely it is that you are. I think that is a very, very good point, actually. And Samuel hearing clips of Pinocchio saying, I'm a real boy. The marriage thing I worked out, oddly, when I was writing my last book. Speaking of books, I wonder if AI can help me this weekend. The problem is I can't afford now. I'm so up against it with the new book. I can't afford to waste a few hours trying to get my head around AI in the hope that it can help me write the book that I've got to write. I don't know what is the answer. Who knows? Someone else can be the first to get an entire non-fiction book essentially cobbled together by AI. So in my last book, my second book, How Not to Be Wrong, The Art of Changing Your Mind, I really dug into why I held such weird views on marriage. And by weird, I mean that I could probably have got a little pitch at that NatC conference that unfolded earlier this week, where people were trivializing the Holocaust and talking about how unless you're a part of a heterosexual full marriage, then you're not providing a proper family, and they were just the warm-up acts. I could have done that. I could have stood there, possibly not in that room. You might have bumped into Suella Braverman in the green room, but I could have stood in that room. I could have stood in that auditorium and explained why marriage was the gold standard of relationships. I wouldn't have been heteronormative about it. I wouldn't have said it has to be a man married to a woman, because I'm adopted, so I'm more than comfortable with non-biological parenting. But I would have argued about why you need to be married in order to give your children the best possible start in life. And it never really occurred to me that I might be wrong. That's the problem when you're wrong about stuff. It never occurs to you that you might be wrong. And in fact, the minute you pause or begin to pause to contemplate the possibility that you might be wrong, then depending on how your personality is constructed, you let in all sorts of doubts and frailties. And we're often conditioned, especially men in this country, to resist all acknowledgement or admission of doubts and frailties. So you end up in a right old tizzy. But my reason for having this weird view of marriage, I'll tell you when I knew it was weird, when I began to think it was weird, was when I realised you could almost swap me out for Ian Duncan Smith on this subject and we'd sound exactly the same. That's like a sort of version of the law of Widdicombe, isn't it? And if you want to know what to think about something that you find confusing, find out what Cheese Sandwich Widdicombe thinks and do the opposite. I found myself sounding almost identical to Ian Duncan Smith on the question of marriage, and I didn't really want to sound identical to Ian Duncan Smith on any subject. It turns out there are a couple that he's right on, but even a stopped clock is right twice a day. China, I think, most obviously at the moment. So I dug into it a bit, and it was all to do with being adopted. It was all to do, I won't bore you with all the details, there's a book you can buy if you want them. It was all to do with the idea of me believing that marriage was better, because that was a large part of me being adopted, if you see what I mean. That my life has been pretty good. I've been very blessed with wonderful parents, and if I'd stayed with my biological mother, who would have been a teenage single mum in rural Ireland, so my life would have been very different. And given the state of religion and social judgment back then in the 1970s, it would have been in many ways measurably worse. So I'd kind of morphed a very personal perspective, a very personal experience into a really judgmental platform. But because something had worked for me, and of course, if you really want to get complex about it, people will not be given up for adoption in countries where you don't have a sort of Victorian attitude to illegitimacy and wedlock. And that is probably, in the great scheme of things, that might well be a good thing. But I didn't like to overcomplicate it unduly. I was just trying to work out why I ended up with opinions that people I loved found offensive. And by people I love, I mean people I love who were having children without being married. And I am cured now of that position. I'm still glad I'm married, but I am cured of the idea that it represents something, that it by definition represents something superior to not being married. But again, for me, it's better. And for a lot of people, it's better. Otherwise, you wouldn't get married. The fastest growing kind of family in Britain at the moment is unmarried cohabiting couples. You're looking now at about 1 in 5 of all families involve couples who aren't married. That's just under, well, you know what 1 in 5 is. It's around about 20%, or 3.6 million people. It's gone up 700,000. Sorry, 3.6 million families. It's gone up 700,000 in the last 10 years or so, and it accounts for almost 3/4 of the growth in families over the 10-year period. So if you were to plot a graph, then you would, and to continue it into the future, then you would, at a not too distant point, you would see unmarried families or families involving couples who aren't married overtaking families involving couples who are. And I want to do a nice phone-in about why. And I am going to promise you, and if I don't keep this promise, I'm going to give you permission to give me a little bit of a metaphorical slap. I'm going to promise you that I won't be an idiot. All right? I'm not going to sort of tease you about, well, of course you say that you don't want to be married, but I bet you do. All of that, okay? This is about two positions, really. People who would like to be married but are not. Why not? 0345 6060973. And people who don't want to be married at all. So there's the Times quote the managing partner of a law firm, and he says many individuals do still believe in the idea of a lavish wedding. However, when a couple is trying to save in order to get on the housing ladder or simply get by, ceremonies and the costs associated with starting a family are of less immediate importance. And then some fellow from something called the Marriage Foundation, which I don't know if that is Ian Duncan Smith's outfit, but it was something similar. He contributes to the conversation by saying, people are saying we'd rather spend our money on rent or a deposit than a huge party for which we can't see the point. Government has failed dismally to sell the message that marriage is really important. Is it really government's job to sell the message that marriage is really important? I don't know. I personally don't think so, but I know that I did once, so I can't really get on my moral high horse about this with anybody. So here are 2 questions, okay? You're not married but you want to be, or you're not married but you don't want to be. 0345 6060973. Give me the why of it. And if we can serve a slight purpose, it might be that you thought you wanted a lavish wedding and you didn't have a lavish wedding, but you did have a wedding. In fact, you had an unlavish wedding and it was lovely. Because I think if we can do anything that might be loosely described as a public service today, it would perhaps be to encourage people to recognise that the real beauty of being married is the feeling you have when it's all over and you look at each other and you think, crikey, look at what we've gone and done. Look what we've done, we're crazy kids. What have we done? Well, I can only speak for myself. I had a sort of middlingly lavish wedding, but the best bit was the bit when you'd all cleared off. And it was just me and Mrs. O'Brien reflecting upon what we'd done and the magic of it at the moment. And I know that's unfair on people who don't want to get married, and that's fine, because I'm not saying mine is better. I'm just telling you what it was. I'm telling you what felt special and what felt magic. So there it is. The numbers are significant. The numbers are newsworthy. There are 2 constituencies of contributor to this story. The first is people who are not married but would really like to be. And the second is people who are not married and don't want to be. And I'd like you to explain both of those positions. And then, just because I'm greedy, and this is the last hour we get to spend together until Monday, and then people who thought they wanted a lavish wedding and didn't have one, had a different wedding, had a much more modest event, and look back with just the same sense of wonder as they would have done if they'd had a crystal carriage and, I don't know, Beyonce performing on the pyramid stage. It's 12:15. Hit the numbers now. You will get through, okay? 0345 6060 973. One thing that really interests me, and I don't know if we will be able to measure this effectively, but one thing that really does interest me is one of the stirrups I used to get up on my high horse was the idea that quite a lot of unmarried couples involved a man who didn't want to get married and a woman who did. I wonder whether that's changing now or whether I have just described you. But I mean it. I can only say to you that if you are putting it off because you want a big party, the best bit is when the party's over. 12:16 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Hit the numbers now. You will get through. Oof. 12:19 is the time. Not getting married. You want to? Not getting married. You don't want to. Did get married. Didn't have the lavish party you thought you were going to have, but it was wonderful anyway. Rachel has managed to land between all three of those stools, I'm afraid. She says, I want a lavish wedding and my partner wants to buy a house. Therefore, we are not married and we are still renting. And Julie points out that in the current situation, even a relatively modest marriage, wedding, ceremony and party just for close friends and family is going to be beyond the reach of people who would rather be doing it than not. James is in Cardiff to kick things off. James, what do you want to say?
Hi again, James. Yeah, me and my partner have been together 20 years. I'm gay, so we're in a same-sex relationship. And we always said we'll get married. I mean, neither of us are that kind of like have to get married, want the ring, when's the date? But it's just kind of something we've been put off, and it's just kind of been kicked down the road for a long, long time now. It's just one of those things that it's kind of just put to the back of the queue. Right. So, we said we wanted to kind of move, buy a house because we can't leave sort of put a mortgage on the flat.
What is it about today's story that you think you slot into, James?
Well,
because it sounds to me like you've been going through this for 20 years. It's not new. Yeah. You're not part of the new code. I mean, so why? Okay, let me do it this way. Why aren't you married?
Mainly just due to financial reasons. Yeah. And we've actually said more recently we'd quite be happy to go down to City Hall and just get married, with a couple of friends. But then friends and family not happy at all. No, we want the big do. We want this.
Even after 20 years?
Yeah. So, they want the big do, but, who's going to pay for it? So it's just one of those things, okay, we'll put it off and have to try and save up again. But it's not always that easy. So
it's a shame, really. Yeah, I hear you. Thank you, mate. You never know what's around the corner. I wonder how much blame OK Magazine and Hello Magazine bear for this sort of phenomenon. Not you necessarily, but just people thinking that weddings have to be huge and have to be lavish, which I'm pretty sure didn't used to be the case, or at least it didn't used to be as clear. You've got celebrities selling their wedding pictures, and obviously in order to make the magazine sell copies, the wedding pictures have to be more and more remarkable, more and more out of the ordinary, and yet, of course, they then begin to look like the ordinary, and so people think that they should be having similar affairs, similar events themselves. 12:21 is the time. Melvin Coventry points out, now you need people who are deciding not to get married because the cost terrified them. Yet another subject our Prime Minister wouldn't have a clue about. That's true. But, there'd be quite a few people who haven't got a clue about it. Doesn't mean that you can't imagine what it would be like. And this is nice from Mike in Warrington. He says, good show, James O'Brien. Keep it up. Michael, I shall do my best. Katrina contributes, 3 out of 4 of my husbands and my marriages were for financial reasons. Thank you for sharing. Laura's in Nottingham. Laura, what would you like to say?
Hello. Me and my husband are coming up to 2 years married.
Right.
And we eloped. We just said we had 4 children, 2 each from previous relationships.
Right.
And with the cost of, we did start looking at a big white wedding, and at the cost of it being 20,000-30,000 easily before you've even thought about a lot of
Why is it so expensive?
No idea. We were looking at £10,000 just for a venue.
Yeah.
And then just by chance, this place came up on Facebook in Cheshire.
Yeah.
And it specialised in micro weddings. The people who run the venue live there, and they were our witnesses. And so we just didn't take anybody. I FaceTimed my mum because she was on holiday when we got married.
Did she know you were getting married?
She did know. At first she thought I was joking when I said we were eloping. Parents were not his parents weren't pleased at first, but actually we just said, why would we put ourselves in debt when we just want to be married?
Did you have a first party? Did you have a big party the first time round? Were you married before, both of you, or not?
No. We've it's the first marriage for both of us, and we've still never had a party. But it was at the tail end of COVID.
I think that's romantic, Laura.
Do you know? Thank you, because we do, and I've got zero regrets. I wore black on my wedding day because I thought, what's convention? Let's do it our way. We played beer pong. We just had like a playlist of the songs that remind us of each other all day. It was gorgeous, outdoor wedding, sort of very luscious greenery, a big lake. We had some lovely photos taken, and then we went to Leeds Festival the next day.
God, so what's not to like? And what you've done there, whether you realised it or not, is you've described an event in your life that was all about you and your partner, you and your husband, haven't you? Not about anybody else, not about keeping up with the Joneses or keeping the in-laws happy or... Who had the kids?
They went to family. We just sweet talked people and said, sorry, you're not coming to the wedding, but here's the children.
There you go. Here's the booby prize. You can get the children for the weekend.
But I mean, ultimately, it's so easy to get drawn into, you need favours and you need to invite so and so's auntie and so and so's cousin, and actually, does it really matter when?
Do you know, that's fascinating. I wonder if push came to shove, whether or not upsetting your parents is a bigger part of wedding organisation than anybody likes to admit. Because you end up inviting more of their friends than your own, don't you?
Absolutely. I can think of one example of somebody I know who's done that in recent years, who didn't know quite a lot of the guests personally. Even though it was their wedding. It's that, well, it could be. I love that. Thank you. That was what I was hoping for, someone who's done it completely differently. And you described it really, I'll use that word again, it sounded really romantic. Maybe not the beer pong, but the rest of it was just sort of, this is us, this is about why we want to be together. I wonder if anyone's ever done a measure on the more expensive the marriage, the more expensive the wedding, the shorter the marriage. I'd love to see that research. It's a bit pessimistic, but the bigger the party, the less energy you've put into actually being certain that you are with the person that you want to be with. I don't know. Maybe that's a bit too miserable. Barry's in Berlin. Barry, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I'm in the camp of never want to get married, but kind of every so often fancy the idea of it.
What, the party or the commitment, the public pledge?
The former.
The party.
With me and my partner, we've been together for 15 years, and I think the only time it ever comes up of, should we, is either topics about, sort of tax and security and that sort of stuff, or we go to a really nice wedding and it's super romantic, and then you just have that warm, fuzzy feeling for time to come afterwards,
I do know. What's different then between you and me? Why did I grow up thinking marriage? How old are you for a start, if I may ask that?
I'm a little younger than you. I'm 43.
Okay, So never a thing when you were a little boy, or when you didn't just presume that you would get married one day.
Probably, yeah. But because it was the norm, I think maybe the difference between you and me is that, at least from what I've heard you talk about on the show, you grew up in a household with a pretty happy, loving marriage.
Yes,
you
very
a great
much
example. So. I did not.
That's a big part of it.
Married for 30 years longer than they should have, sort of thing,
Yeah, it could go either way, couldn't it? I mean, if you've had your childhood disrupted by divorce, you might be even more determined to have a marriage yourself. But equally, you could think, well, I'm not going down that road. It doesn't guarantee anything.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think for me, it comes down to something a bit more practical.
Yeah.
Is, when I think about, it's already been mentioned, cost of a wedding is extortionate and only growing. We're at that stage now, we're trying to save for mortgage, etc. Also the cost of divorce, and it's pretty much, even having the best faith in my relationship, which is 15 years so far, do I really want to gamble money that we could invest in doing things which are much more important for my family and so on?
I'm very rational, but if we were to be brutal, then we might point out, Barry, that being rational is the opposite of being romantic. So I the best of both worlds. And thank you, Barry, someone's done the research. It turns out Thank you to whoever sent this. It's unsigned, but this is like having an AI producer. Planning a dream wedding can be a costly endeavour. But the good news is the less expensive the wedding, the more likely the marriage is to last. This is some research that has been undertaken by, I will tell you shortly, by whom, that has found that, just as I suggested, the more you spend on the wedding ceremony, on the big party itself, the shorter the marriage is likely to be. The couple spend on an engagement ring and the ceremony is inversely associated with marriage duration. I'll try and retweet that a little later in the programme or a little later today. It kind of fits with what I was thinking about because it's about prioritising. The idea that having a really big party or a lavish do is more important than you've got to put work in on the relationship, haven't you? It's coming up to 12:30. If you're wondering why I'm saying a lot, it's just to prove I'm not AI. I'm a normal human being. What did he say? I'm a normal person, said Matt Hancock earlier. We shall get on with what the new normal is with regard to marriage shortly. Unmarried cohabiting couples are the fastest growing kind of family in Britain, and thankfully, it's a much more enjoyable conversation, this, than in the days when I was sitting up on my high horse lambasting everybody like Barry, who didn't want to do what I wanted to do. I worry slightly about the mention of divorce. I mean, the idea that the division of belongings, the division of money, the division of assets at the end of a marriage, that's just a horrible, horrible thing. I'm not going to get married because I don't want to have to pay for the divorce. Almost sounds sometimes, I'm sure this wasn't Barry's intention, almost sounds as if you're saying, I don't really want to pay my fair share towards my ex's future that I would be required to do by law if we got married and then got divorced. But that's just me overthinking things. 12:30 is the time. Thomas Watts is here with your headlines. It is 12:34. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I nearly forgot my name there. What is the name? Someone needs to say this in my ear. What's the name of the dog? Is it Hacker T Dog? Hacker. It's just Hacker. So Hacker the dog. Hacker T Dog. Hacker the dog. So this is what Matt Hancock's celebrity career is based on. He's bidding to replace Hacker the dog on children's television. If you think I'm exaggerating, have a listen to the dog first here.
We're just normal men.
What do you mean, normal men?
We're just innocent men.
Let's do this again. Have a listen to Hacker the dog.
We're just normal men.
What do you mean, normal men?
We're just innocent men.
One of the funniest things you'll ever see on the screen there. But look it up. And here's Matt Hancock.
I'm a normal person. Now, I'm not a Conservative MP, right? And it's just be normal like the people who we represent. That's what we need to do. That's a really good starting point.
I really hope I'm not the only one who thinks that's hilarious. I think that's one of the funniest things we've ever done. It's uncanny. Matt Hancock is sort of basing his post-political career on a puppet dog. Send me a text if you thought it was rubbish, just so that I don't do it again another 10 times before the end of the show. Back to marriage, back to weddings. I'm 30. This is nice from Ben. Quite poignant, actually, Ben. I've been with my partner, Katie, for 4 years. I want to spend my life with her, but we don't think it's important anymore. It's not at the top of our priorities because keeping food on the table and the kids in clothes are obviously more important than a flash ring, a big dress, and overpriced chicken and dauphinoise potatoes. What have you got against dauphinoise? But it's a bit racist. What's wrong with dauphinoise potatoes? This is nice. We're now in our 38th year of marriage. Our rings from the Co-op cost £20. The killer was my daughter's wedding in 2018, which came in at 25k, and this tallies with my idea. I know that causation is not correlation, so when I asked whether or not there was any research into cost of wedding versus length of marriage, I was being a bit mischievous, but I don't think it can be a complete coincidence, can it? And there is some more evidence of that coming up. Hi, Jay. No, where is it? I'm a couples therapist. I've had clients in the past who are still paying off the big wedding and the relationship is in crisis. The pressure on them to celebrate the wedding from external factors, family, societal expectations, etc., can really expedite some of the cracks in the relationship coming to the surface. I completely believe that. When I got married, it cost us 1,500 quid in total, registry office and pub afterwards with meals for 20 people, and we're still going strong. Julia similarly also works with in the sector. I know couples therapist isn't exactly the sector. Julia is. She's a wedding dress. I had a wedding dress design business for over 20 years, and I'm sure that statistic is correct. I know that there were many marriages ending in divorce before the wedding was even paid for. And the bigger that pressure, the bigger that bill, I think the more likely the cracks are to appear in the marriage, to appear in the relationship. Jake's in Stockton. Jake, what would you like to say?
Yeah, fall into the category of not married and don't particularly want to be married, being honest. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Me and my partner have been together 4 years. We bought a house last year, got a dog shortly after moving into the house, and we've always been really honest that neither of us are particularly interested in being married. It's a ring and a piece of paper. Potentially, it doesn't change.
There are legal considerations and stuff like that, but you can work. Would you do as like? So, what is it? Is it because you talk about a ring and a piece of paper, and that's the marriage. That's not the wedding. So again, the distinction needs to be drawn. You don't have any. Does your partner not have any desire? So sort of a bit of casual sexism, presuming it's the bride who's more likely to want to have a big shindig where she gets to wear the fancy frock and gets to be the centre of attention for the day.
No, she actively hates the idea of being the centre of attention. She's quite happy to kind of just not have that. Because I was surprised as well. I had the similar reaction when we were kind of chatting about it.
Yes.
And she had the same view that neither of us wanted to be married, and we were quite happy with that. The legal side of it is covered with kind of our wills and the way we've separated that out when we bought the house, and kind of just being honest.
So you're quite grown up. You're quite grown up about it.
Yeah, I think my mum would probably disagree, but I'll test that from you. If you're saying I'm grown up, that's a good thing.
Well, I was about to ask about your mother, actually, funnily enough. How does she feel about the fact that you're not going to have a big day? Does she know?
Yeah, she knows. She's kind of accepted that my older brother is married and he had his big day with my sister-in-law, and I think as long as the golden child's done it, I think that's fine. She's a bit disappointed she won't get to kind of have that day, but she accepts that that's where me and my
that's what you want for you. And no, I mean, I think if you were my age, then you'd stand out a lot more than you do now. How do you, among your peer group and your mates and family, is it a big deal, or is it just, fair enough, you crack on?
No, I think everyone's kind of gone with that. We've got a house and the dog, and everyone's kind of like, well, that's that. There's no need for a wedding to kind of solidify. They're just like,
What if you didn't have a dog, Jake? What if you only had a house? How much would that cover?
Probably, I wouldn't be liked as much. So no. I think people only come to see me for the dog.
The dog's the clincher. We've got a dog.
Yeah.
We don't need a wedding certificate. We've got a dog, lads. We've got a dog. I mean, that's commitment.
Yeah, I mean, I jokingly, when we got our mortgage, said to our partner, well, we don't need to get married now. We've got a 30-year commitment to a mortgage. That's better than most marriages lasted, and that did not go down particularly well, but she saw the funny side later on.
Well, and to be fair, it is a bigger commitment than, thank you, Jake, it is a bigger commitment than a mere marriage, than just, getting hitched and then going back to now I'm going to sound like I'm discriminating against people in rented accommodation, but it's a huge commitment to each other to take a mortgage out together, especially in this day and age when there's very little or no prospect whatsoever of either of you being able to sustain it alone. Michelle's in Hemel Hempstead. Michelle, what would you like to say?
Well, I totally went against all of my friends and family and didn't have a big wedding. I got my dress from a charity shop for 25 quid, went to the local registry office, and we had the most amazing time. Yeah,
I believe that. Why? What made you? Because you mentioned you went against the sort of mood of the time. What was the reasoning behind that?
Well, to be honest, we didn't really want to get married, and then my other half got really ill.
I'm sorry.
About 18 months ago.
Okay.
Totally recovered from it, but it really scared me because I know you're saying marriage isn't important, but that piece of paper is really powerful.
I'm not saying that at all. I just said to the last bloke, don't underestimate the legal importance of being married when it comes to things like that. When it comes to, God forbid, your partner dying.
And wills and things are all well and good, but that piece of paper.
Get a civil partnership. Just get it done, Lee. So what did you do? Registry office.
Registry office, wedding reception in the back garden. I did a self-catered afternoon tea for the Wrinklies on the Saturday. And then on Sunday, we had some friends round, music, a barbecue, which when I booked the barbecue, I told him it was for a party. I didn't tell it was for a wedding.
Gosh.
And when he got there, he went, I didn't realise it was a wedding. I went, it's not. It's a day after party. Because I think they would have charged me more.
You might be right. Hey, I'd never thought of that. You say just tell him it's for a wake. And you probably get, get slightly different. Don't tell the DJ that, whatever you do. What
No.
What was there no little bit of you that what about friends and people? Did people sort of tell you that they couldn't understand why you'd done it like this, or?
There were a couple of friends that couldn't understand why I'd done it like that. But at the end of the day, it was more important for me and my husband to get married.
Especially with the scare.
Changed my name.
No, I think that's another conversation for another day, actually. That I think I was probably the back end of that generation that thought that it mattered, and I think in retrospect I was very wrong about that, and I think my daughters probably agree. Thank you, Michelle. There is something emerging here, and I thought it might, and there are two types of wedding. This is what I meant when I said that soppy stuff about the most important part of the day being the end of it, when everyone else has cleared off. That you get that regardless of what you've done. However, let's not underestimate the pleasure of seeing everybody you love in the world under one roof celebrating your togetherness. I mean, you don't want to go too far. You don't want to swing the pendulum too far in the opposite direction. But it's a sign of a changing world. It's a sign of changing society. Not just, of course, well, I don't think you can separate the statistics from the attitudes. So the story gives you the statistics, but the statistics lead you to the attitude. So it is no longer the case in this country that the sort of general view is that if you're going to start a family, then you need to be married. It just doesn't hold true either statistically or in terms of opinions. Kerry's in Rhyl in Wales. Kerry, what would you like to say?
Hiya. Just that I'm only 33, and marriage to me is still quite important.
Yes.
I've got a son from a previous relationship whose dad actually passed away last year.
Oh, crikey! I'm sorry.
He was only 8 as well. And we broke up when we were 2. He was 2. It was a very amicable split. And I actually got married to my new partner last year. That meant that my son had that father figure again. We are a complete family unit.
Okay.
So yeah, it was difficult, but we've got through together as a unit, as a family, if that makes any sense.
Of course it does. And I mean, it's hard to know if you hadn't had the bereavement in the past, whether you'd have felt as strongly about wanting to assemble the tightest ship you could. That's what it sounds like to me, Kerry.
Yeah, because it was an illness for my ex-partner that lasted 2.5 years.
Oh.
So he was happy that his new stepdad was taking over the role, if you like, taking the reins, and it wasn't the be all end all if he didn't agree, but he agreed. He was happy. They got on together.
That's nice.
And it shows there's sort of, for my son, there's life after. After things can still be good.
Yeah. Yeah, and I suppose he wants, the obvious stuff, whether it's someone standing on the touchline or whatever it is, that it's just altogether tighter. So the wedding was modest then.
It wasn't a massive affair. We got married in the church. It was really important for me and my now husband to be married.
Yes. So the marriage again. It's the distinction between the marriage and the wedding, isn't it? I see these scales, Kerry, as if you've got all your weights on the wedding side, and there's a finite amount of weights that you can put on the scales. And we hear from a lot of people who've put so many weights on the wedding side, they've forgotten about the marriage. You've got almost all of your weights on the marriage side. You wanted to be married, but you might as well have a nice wedding if you can.
Yeah, we know a lot of people who have spent the 10, 20, 30,000 pounds, and at the end of it, you're still getting the same certificate. You're still having the same memories.
We should have. I mean, it might be a bit late now, but the regrets. I wish I hadn't spent as much money as I did on my wedding. I think we can squeeze a few of them in probably before Sheila time. Kerry, thank you. Take care. Quite a poignant backdrop to that. Well, a very poignant backdrop to that. But again, that notion of that's the change, isn't it? So now I don't get on my high horse anymore. The area of interest is the tension between marriage and wedding. So ceremony and relationship, and that's been a real eye-opener today. Are you prepared to ring me and tell me that spending an absolute ton of money on your wedding was the stupidest thing you've ever done? 0345 6060 973. It's 12:46. It is 12:50. I want to take a moment now to tell you about this week's Full Disclosure. It's a bit different. Well, it's very different from usual. One of the great pleasures of presenting Full Disclosure is that because so many people who are famous have done it. We've built a space in which we can tell stories of people who are not famous. I say that. This week's guest has over 16 million followers on TikTok, so by at least one major measure of celebrity, she's a heck of a lot more famous than me or many of the people who have been on Full Disclosure. But I don't know that most people listening to this programme will have heard of Evie Meg. I mentioned to a caller yesterday who was telling us that during Mystery Hour of all places, that his 16-year-old daughter has Tourette's, which is one of the most misunderstood and perhaps misrepresented conditions around. Evie Meg started on social media essentially spreading awareness of that condition, and then rather later in life got a diagnosis of something called PANDAS, which is a horrible condition. I've mentioned it to you on a couple of occasions, about which still precious little is known, and the UK is lagging behind America and other countries on both diagnosing and dealing with it. So I just think she's fantastic. She's only 22. She lives in a sort of constant pressure from both of those conditions, and only, as I say, relatively recently got the second diagnosis, which has made a major difference. But what she does that's so powerful is share everything with people, which not only spreads awareness, but also, of course, provides comfort and company for people who may be suffering similarly. PANDAS, if you don't know about it, stands for Pediatric Autoimmune Neuropsychiatric Disorder associated with streptococcal infections. And I just a dreadful theory of mine, a dreadful fear of mine, is that a lot of people have it who don't know, and inexplicable collapses in health, which seem to be on the increase, not even anecdotally, also statistically, could perhaps be explained by this. So do find out more about that if anything you hear in this little clip from my interview with Evie Meg rings any particularly uncomfortable bells for you. She is on social media as this trippy hippie on Instagram and various other platforms. So she's easy to find. I just think she's incredible, and I'm pretty sure when you've heard this, that when you've heard the whole of this week's Full Disclosure, I'm pretty sure that you will too.
My tics actually started in secondary school.
They did.
But they just, we didn't think they were tics. We thought I had hiccups all the time.
Yeah.
Because that's what my first tic was. It just sounds like a hiccup. But I was having them hundreds of times a day. And so I tried things like eating slower and stuff like that to try and get rid of these hiccups, which obviously didn't go away.
Drinking a glass of water from the wrong side of the glass.
Yeah, upside down. Obviously none of that worked. So we did actually go to the doctors about these hiccups, but they were like, oh, that's really bizarre. Right. Can't do anything. So yeah, that's when the tics started. And then I did get more in college, and it was stuff like clapping and blinking and like eyebrow raising. I've had that one for years, just like very minor ones. And then, yeah, as you mentioned, I also started struggling with selective mutism, which I didn't know existed at the time, and I didn't know why I couldn't speak in college, but it was just like a block and I couldn't get any words out. It was almost like the same intense fear that I mentioned in secondary school. I was still very fearful of people.
Paralysed with fear almost. Is that
yeah,
way
essentially,
of putting it?
Yeah. But selective mutism is, selective is kind of misleading because it makes it sound like a choice and it's not. But basically, it's usually confined to one place or certain people. So with children, the most common place is school. Okay. And then like with me, it was just college. So it was like the second that I got in the taxi to go to college, that was it. I couldn't speak for the rest of the day. And then I'd come home, walk through the door, hi mum, how are you? Like it was just a complete switch.
I mean, you mentioned them not knowing what to do with your hiccups. How were doctors and CAMs and other medical professionals dealing with, you could sense confusion more than anything else?
Yeah, I mean, there wasn't really much happening at that time.
You talk about this so matter-of-factly, Evie, which is incredible, but I mean, to people listening, whether they are familiar with the work you do on social media to draw attention and do activism for these issues, I mean, you're describing things that are huge and epic, and like, what the hell is happening to me? Did you must have had days like that where...
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially around sort of even just 2 years ago, when we started realising that there was something much darker happening. But yeah, I am quite aware that I do talk about it very sort of relaxed now, which in a way is kind of sad, because I'm so desensitised to it that sometimes I don't see the severity of it, because I'm just so used to it. But I suppose...
I didn't mean it like that.
No, it's okay.
I meant it more in the sense that at the time you wouldn't have been able to talk about it like this.
Yeah, no, I didn't. Because I suppose when it's actually happening, you're just so in your own head, you don't really think about it like that. It's only sort of afterwards that I kind of thought, oh, okay, yeah, that was quite bad that I didn't speak for literally 2 years in college.
So it's an astonishing interview with an astonishing person, and her, thanks to her amazing mum Sam as well for coming along. Download Full Disclosure wherever you get your podcast. That's almost it for this week. But I did well. If you build it, they will come. People who regret spending a ton of money on their wedding. Charlotte's in Leeds. Charlotte, what have you got?
Hi.
Hello.
So if I can give one message to people, don't do it. Don't waste all your money.
What did you do?
Well, it was 2014, so a while ago now, but we spent probably 25,000. And yeah, I mean, we don't even speak to half the people anymore that attended.
I know, that's the amazing thing, isn't it? Especially work colleagues or someone who you just...
I know.
Are you still together?
People. We are still together, yeah. But we had a Sunday wedding as well, so half the people left early because they had work on the Monday. You're just paying for everybody else to have an amazing day, and you don't even get to see half the people. We had 2 different bands. I mean, it was a good day, but was it worth £25,000? No. We need a new kitchen, and 10 years on, we still haven't got a new kitchen. We spent all the money on the wedding.
Every single time you come into the kitchen, you're thinking, why did we do it? Why did we do it?
That is true. Honestly, you don't need to. Don't do it. Have a garden party in your back garden.
Just have it. Keep it sweet. Spend some money. Don't do it. What would you spend now if you were doing it all again?
A little bit.
What do you reckon?
I just have my nearest and dearest. I'd have a couple of friends that actually mean something to me. And yeah, probably £5,000 maximum.
You can have a great time for £5,000.
Exactly. Yeah, so honestly, don't do it if you're listening. A waste of money.
Thank you, Charlotte.
And I've still got the husband as well. So.
Well, yes. Well, I don't think it would count if you hadn't got the husband. That would, because you need to be together. As in the marriage, we're back to those scales again. The marriage is a lot more important than the wedding. Charlotte, thank you. That's almost it from me for another week. If you did miss any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player. I think the highlight was the Matt Hancock Hacker the Dog mash-up personally, but you know, it's horses for courses. You can rewind live radio, so you could listen to that again and again and again, or enjoy the whole show podcast. You'll also find on Global Player all of LBC's shows to catch up on, as well as the world's biggest podcasts, including Full Disclosure this week with the extraordinary Evie Meg. So rewind live radio on Global Player. Download for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Tom Swarbrick with you at 4, and for the first time in months, I'm bang on time to hand you over to Sheila Fogarty. 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 Hand you over to Sheila Fogarty.